June 15, 1944, 3 miles off the western shore of Saipan. The Pacific Ocean rolls dark beneath a moonless sky. Aboard the USS Maryland, a battleship that has seen action from Pearl Harbor to the Gilberts, sailors move through the pre-dawn ritual of checking equipment. The smell of salt spray mixes with diesel fuel and gun oil. Somewhere below deck, a young machinist's mate named Robert Kellerman sits on his bunk reading a letter from home for the third time. He doesn't know it yet. But in 72 hours, a piece of his ship will end up inside a Marine Corps tank and change the course of a battle. On the beaches ahead, the Japanese wait. Saipan is not like the other islands. It's bigger, more valuable. 15 miles long, 6 miles wide, with mountains that offer observation posts stretching to the horizon. The Japanese have turned it into a fortress. 30,000 troops, artillery hidden in caves, machine gun nests carved into coral ridges. They know what's coming. They've known since the first reconnaissance flights spotted the American fleet gathering like a storm on the edge of the world. And they've prepared something special for the tanks. The Marines of the 2nd and 4th Divisions understand what awaits them. They've seen the intelligence reports. They know about the anti-tank ditches, the mines buried in black volcanic sand, the 47 mm guns positioned to fire down every approach route. They know that Japanese doctrine calls for tank hunters to emerge from spider holes at night, carrying satchel charges and magnetic mines, moving silent as ghosts through the darkness. But knowledge doesn't make it easier. In the hold of an LST, landing ship, tank, rocking gently in the swell, Staff Sergeant James Holloway sits in the driver's hatch of his M4A2 Sherman, designated C-23. The designation means nothing poetic. Just another tank, another crew, another chance to die on a beach nobody back home has ever heard of. Holloway is 26 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania where his father ran a machine shop. Before the war, he fixed tractors. Now he drives 30 tons of steel into places where metal goes to die. His crew is good, better than good. Corporal Eddie Vasquez, the bow gunner, was a Golden Gloves boxer in Los Angeles. Quick hands, quicker mind, he can clear a jam on the Ashe 30 caliber machine gun in under 10 seconds, even in the dark. Private First Class Thomas Chen, the loader, came from a family that ran a restaurant in San Francisco. They'd been sent to Manzanar in 42, Japanese internment, but Chen had enlisted anyway, needing to prove something nobody should have to prove. He loads the 75 mm rounds with a rhythm that feels like music. Smooth, efficient, never rushed. Lance Corporal Marcus Webb, the gunner, grew up hunting deer in the mountains of Tennessee. He understands patience, the way prey moves, the way predators think. He can hit a moving target at 800 yards on a good day. On a bad day, he hits it anyway. And Lieutenant William Cross, the tank commander, 23 years old, college dropout from Michigan, carries the weight that all tank commanders carry. The knowledge that every decision echoes inside a steel box with 4 other lives hanging on it. They've been together since Tarawa. That's worth mentioning because most tank crews don't survive Tarawa. The Marines lost 35 Shermans on that tiny atoll, knocked out by hidden guns, drowned in the reef, burned by flamethrowers when Japanese infantry swarmed them at night. C-23 made it through. Barely. They'd taken a hit to the engine deck that should have killed them, but the round struck at an angle, glanced off, detonated against a palm tree instead. Webb still has nightmares about the sound, the shriek of metal on metal, the smell of scorched paint, the way the whole tank rang like a bell. Since then, they've made modifications. Nothing official. Nothing in the manual. Just the kind of improvisation that happens when men realize the equipment wasn't designed by people who've actually used it in combat. They've welded spare track links to the hull for extra armor, bolted sheets of 1/4-inch plate to the turret sides, strapped sandbags to the glacis plate. The tank now weighs 3 tons more than factory specifications, moves slower, guzzles fuel faster, but it's theirs. They trust it. And in the Pacific, where every 4th tank seems to brew up from a single well-placed shot, trust matters more than speed. The pre-invasion bombardment begins at 5:42 a.m. 14 battleships, 11 cruisers, and 64 destroyers open fire simultaneously. The sound is beyond description. It's not heard, it's felt. A physical pressure that compresses the air, rattles teeth, makes the steel deck of the LST vibrate like a tuning fork. The horizon erupts in flame. Saipan disappears behind a curtain of smoke and explosions. Trees vaporize, buildings collapse. The earth itself seems to scream. Inside C-23, the crew sits in silence. They've learned not to take comfort in the bombardment. They've learned that shells, no matter how many, don't kill what's underground. They've learned that the Japanese are good at waiting, good at surviving, good at emerging from rubble that looks like nothing could have lived through it. The LST's ramp drops at 8:43 a.m. Holloway fires the engine. The Sherman's radial roars to life, a deep mechanical bellow that drowns out everything else. He eases the throttle forward. The tank rolls down the ramp, treads biting into the steel, then drops into 4 feet of water with a splash that sends spray over the bow. The waterproofing holds. The exhaust pipes, extended upward with jury-rigged stacks, keep the engine breathing. They push forward through the surf, waves breaking against the hull, coral crunching under 30 tons of steel. The beach is chaos, not the organized chaos of training exercises, real chaos. The kind that has no pattern, no logic, no mercy. Amtraks burn in the shallows, black smoke pouring from their hatches. Bodies float face down in the surf. Equipment lies scattered across black sand. Rifles, helmets, packs, medical supplies. All the small pieces of war that get abandoned when survival becomes the only mission. Artillery shells scream overhead, impacting with dull crumps that throw up geysers of sand and coral. Machine gun fire rattles from the tree line, sharp, precise, interlocking fields of fire that cut down Marines as they run for cover. Cross keys the radio. Red Dog actual, this is Red Dog 2-3 on the beach, moving to Rally Point Alpha. Static answers. Then a voice, distorted but recognizable. Captain Morrison, the company commander. 2-3, be advised, heavy resistance at the tree line. At guns confirmed in the hills. Keep your head down. Copy that actual. They push inland. The Sherman climbs the beach slope, treads throwing sand, engine straining. They pass a disabled Amtrak with its front blown off. A Marine waves them forward, pointing toward a gap in the seawall. Holloway steers toward it, threading between a crater and a burned-out jeep. Webb traverses the turret slowly, scanning for targets. The 75mm barrel swings left, then right, hunting. There. Movement in the tree line. A flash of khaki. Webb's hand moves to the firing controls. Gunner, he. Troops in the open, 12 o'clock, 300 yards. Chen slams a high explosive round into the breach. Up! Cross peers through his periscope. Confirms. Fire! The Sherman bucks. The 75mm roars. The round screams downrange and detonates in the trees. A flash of orange, a spray of shrapnel, a brief silence before the screaming starts. Target! They push forward. The first 3 hours are constant movement. They support infantry assaults, knock out machine gun nests, blast apart bunkers that refuse to surrender. The temperature inside the tank climbs to 120 degrees. Sweat pours off them in rivers. Chen's hands blister from handling the hot brass casings. Vasquez's eyes burn from cordite smoke. But they keep moving, keep firing, keep surviving. By noon, they've pushed a mile inland. The Japanese counterattack comes at 1:15 p.m. Not infantry, tanks. Type 95 Hago light tanks, 9 tons of riveted steel, carrying a 37mm gun and 2 machine guns, fast but lightly armored, designed for infantry support in China, not for dueling American Shermans. But the Japanese crews are aggressive, fearless. They come down the ridgeline in a V formation, 7 tanks, treads kicking up dust, guns blazing. Cross sees them first. Armor, 11 o'clock, 400 yards. Webb is already traversing. The turret whines, the gun swings left. The lead Hago fires, the round goes wide, screams past the turret, detonates in the ground 30 yards behind them. Gunner, AP, lead tank. Chen has the armor-piercing round loaded before Cross finishes the sentence. Up! Fire! The 75mm speaks. The AP round punches through the Hago's frontal armor like paper, detonates inside, blows the turret clean off. The tank rolls forward another 20 feet before collapsing sideways, burning. Target! Next tank! They work through the formation. 1 round per tank. 3 minutes, 6 kills. The 7th Hago tries to retreat, reverses too quickly, throws a track, slews sideways. Webb puts a round through its engine deck. It brews up, ammunition cooking off inside, hatches blowing open, smoke pouring out in thick black columns. The infantry cheers. But Cross isn't celebrating. He's learned to count. 7 tanks in the attack. Intelligence said the Japanese had armor on Saipan, but not how much. If 7 tanks attacked, how many are left? And where? The answer comes at nightfall. The Marines dig in along a ridgeline overlooking a sugarcane field, foxholes every 10 yards, machine guns positioned to cover the approaches. Mortar teams setting up in defilade. The tanks, 11 Shermans from C Company, form a defensive line, spaced 50 yards apart, engines idling, Crews rotating watch in 2-hour shifts. Holloway grabs 4 hours of sleep on the engine deck. It's not comfortable. The metal radiates heat, vibrates, smells like oil and exhaust. But it's better than inside the tank. Webb and Chen sleep in the turret, curled up around the breech. Vasquez takes first watch, manning the bowgun, eyes scanning the darkness. Cross sits in the commander's hatch, binoculars in hand, watching the field. The moon rises. Quarter phase. Barely enough light to see shapes, not details. At 2:17 a.m., Cross hears something. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. A sound that doesn't belong in the natural rhythm of night. A scraping. Metal on stone. Faint. Distant. But there. He keys the intercom. Wake up. We've got movement. The crew comes alive. No groaning. No complaints. Just smooth, practiced motion. Holloway drops into the driver's seat. Webb slides into the gunner's position. Chen readies a round. Vasquez peers through the bowgun sight. Cross whispers into the radio. Red Dog Actual 2-3. Possible enemy movement, Sector Bravo 4. Morrison's voice comes back, alert but controlled. Copy 2-3. All units weapons hold. Let's see what we're dealing with. The scraping sound grows closer. Then shapes emerge from the darkness. Low, moving slow. 30, maybe 40 figures spread across a 200-yard front. They're crawling, not walking. Staying below the sugarcane tops. Some carry rifles. Others carry satchel charges. Canvas bags packed with explosives, designed to be shoved under a tank's belly or against the engine deck. Tank hunters. This is what they've been dreading since Tarawa. The Japanese perfected this tactic in the jungles of Guadalcanal, refined it through the Gilberts and Marshalls. Send infantry at night. No masked charges, no banzai screams, just silent, disciplined infiltration. Get close to the tanks, disable them, vanish before dawn. Cross makes a decision. Vasquez, bow gun, 200 yards, troops in the open, controlled bursts. Vasquez thumbs the trigger. The .30 caliber opens up, a sharp stuttering bark that shatters the silence. Tracers arc into the darkness, one every 5th round, glowing red streaks that mark the path of death. The first burst catches 3 Japanese soldiers rising to throw their charges. They go down in a tumble of limbs and dropped equipment. The rest scatter. Some dive into shell craters. Others sprint back toward the tree line. A few, the bravest or most desperate, keep coming. Webb traverses the turret. Coax, 3 o'clock, 50 yards. The coaxial machine gun rattles. More tracers. More screaming. More bodies falling into the sugarcane. But they keep coming. One soldier gets within 20 yards before Vasquez cuts him down. Another makes it to 15 before a Marine in a nearby foxhole drops him with a rifle shot. A third actually reaches the tank. Cross sees him rise up from the ground like a ghost. Satchel charge in hand, arm cocked back to throw. Cross draws his .45, leans out of the hatch, fires 3 times. The soldier drops. The charge falls, rolls, detonates 10 feet away. The blast throws shrapnel against the hull, pings and rattles, but does no damage. The attack breaks. The survivors melt back into darkness. The field falls silent again except for moaning, wounded men calling for help in Japanese, voices growing weaker, then stopping. Cross slumps back into the turret. His hands shake, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization that they were seconds away from dying. If that soldier had thrown the charge instead of being shot. If it had landed on the engine deck instead of the ground. If. Everyone okay? His voice comes out hoarse. Good here. Vasquez. I'm fine. Chen. Yeah. Webb. Holloway doesn't answer. Cross looks down, sees the driver's face pale, eyes wide. Holloway! Jesus Christ, whispered, barely audible. They were right there. They were right goddamn there. Cross nods. I know. We need something, some way to see them coming. We can't just wait for them to get close enough to... I know. But knowing doesn't provide solutions. The rest of the night passes in tense silence. Every sound, wind through the sugarcane, a branch snapping, distant artillery, triggers a spike of adrenaline. They don't sleep. They watch. They wait. They survive. Dawn comes slowly. Gray light creeping across the field, revealing the bodies. 23 Japanese soldiers scattered across 200 yards, most still clutching their charges. Captain Morrison walks the line, checking each tank, each crew. When he reaches C-23, he climbs up on the hull, sits on the turret beside Cross, pulls out a cigarette, lights it, takes a long drag. Hell of a night? Cross nods. Morrison exhales smoke. Intelligence says they're going to keep trying, every night until we push to the coast. They can't stop us during the day, so they're going to bleed us at night. Death by 1,000 cuts. We need better night vision, better early warning, something. I'm open to suggestions, Lieutenant. Cross doesn't have any, not yet. They spend the day advancing, slow, grinding. Every 100 yards costs lives, hidden machine guns, snipers in trees, artillery zeroed in on every junction, every clearing, every place a tank might need to go. By nightfall, they've gained another mile. They dig in again, prepare for another night. But this time, something changes. At 1900 hours, a Navy shore party arrives. A lieutenant junior grade named Patterson and 3 enlisted men, hauling equipment on a 6x6 truck. They're looking for the tank company commander. Morrison meets them. Cross listens from nearby. Patterson salutes. Sir, we've been ordered to offload non-essential equipment from the Maryland to make room for casualties. We've got a pile of stuff at the beach that's basically scrap. Thought you might want first pick before we dump it. Morrison raises an eyebrow. What kind of stuff? Damaged fire control equipment, spare parts for systems that got replaced, some old signaling gear, and one foghorn assembly that took shrapnel during the Gilberts. Still works, but it's loud as hell and we don't need it anymore. Morrison shrugs. Take it to supply. Maybe they can use it. Patterson nods, turns to leave. Cross stops him. Wait, did you say foghorn? Yeah, electrically powered. About 40 pounds. You interested? Maybe. How loud is loud as hell? Patterson grins. Put it this way, when we test-fired it off the stern last month, half the crew thought we were under attack. Cross looks at Morrison. Captain, permission to take a look? Morrison waves a hand. Go ahead, just don't blow our position. Cross jogs to the truck. Patterson pulls back a tarp, revealing the horn. It's a beast, a wide-mouthed trumpet made of brass and steel, connected to an electric motor and amplifier assembly. Battle-scarred, dented, but intact. Cross runs his hand over it. An idea is forming. Crazy, desperate, but maybe, just maybe, workable. Can I have this? Patterson blinks. The horn? What are you going to do with it? Win a war. That night, Cross explains the plan to his crew. They're inside the tank, gathered around the turret basket, speaking in whispers. A kerosene lantern provides the only light. Outside, Marines man the perimeter. The distant rumble of artillery echoes across the hills. Cross spreads a hand-drawn map on the breach. Here's the problem. The Japanese own the night. They can see better than us, move quieter, and they know this terrain. We're blind, deaf, reactive. By the time we spot them, they're close enough to kill us. Webb nods. So what do? Cross taps the map. We change the equation. We take away their advantage. We make the night ours. Vasquez frowns. How? Sound. Silence. Chen speaks carefully. You want to make noise? At night? When we're trying to stay hidden? Not random noise. Controlled noise. Specific noise. Something so loud, so shocking, so unexpected that it breaks their attack before it starts. Holloway leans forward. The foghorn. Exactly. Cross pulls a schematic from his pocket, a rough sketch showing the horn mounted on the tank's rear deck. We mount it here behind the turret, wire it into the tank's electrical system, point it backward toward the likely approach routes. When the Japanese come, and they will come, we hit them with a sound they've never heard before. A sound that doesn't exist on a battlefield. Webb studies the sketch. You think it'll scare them? I think it'll confuse them, disorient them, make them hesitate, and in that moment of hesitation, we light them up with every gun we have. Vasquez grins. I like it. Chen looks skeptical. What if it just pisses them off? Then we're no worse off than we are now. They spend 2 hours rigging the horn. Holloway handles the mechanical work, welding brackets to the rear deck, securing the assembly, angling it for maximum dispersion. Vasquez and Chen run electrical cables from the turret, splicing into the tank's power system, rigging a trigger switch next to Cross's seat. Webb stands watch, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness for movement. By 2300 hours, it's done. Cross tests the switch. A low hum builds in the horn's motor. Then, the sound that erupts is indescribable. It's not a honk, not a blast. It's a primal resonating bellow that seems to compress the air itself. A deep, vibrating roar that rolls across the field like thunder, echoing off the hills, rattling through the trees. It lasts 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, every Marine on the line nearly shoots them. Captain Morrison comes sprinting across the perimeter, pistol drawn, screaming. "What the hell was that?" Cross pops his head out of the hatch, grinning sheepishly. "Sorry, sir. Testing new equipment." "New equipment? That sounded like a goddamn battleship." "That's the idea." Morrison stares. Then, slowly, understanding dawns. "You're going to use it against the tank hunters." "Yes, sir." Morrison holsters his pistol, runs a hand through his hair, laughs, a short, disbelieving bark. "You're either a genius or completely insane." "Maybe both. Just don't fire that thing unless they're actually attacking. You'll give every man on this line a heart attack." "Understood, sir." Morrison walks away, shaking his head, muttering something about Marines and their goddamn creativity. The crew settles in to wait. Hours pass. AO 100, AO 200. The moon sets. The darkness deepens. Cross fights to stay awake. His eyelids feel like lead. His body screams for rest, but he can't sleep. Not tonight, not when everything depends on being ready. At 0237, he hears it again. That scraping. That wrong sound. Closer this time. More of them. He keys the intercom. "Contact, get ready." The crew moves silently. Weapons manned, eyes straining into the darkness. The shapes come. More than last night. 50, maybe 60. Low crawlers in the sugarcane. Patient, disciplined. Death moving slow. Cross waits, lets them get close. Closer. 100 yards. 75, 50. Then he flips the switch. The foghorn screams. That massive, unnatural shipborne bellow erupts into the night with a force that seems to shake the ground. It's not just loud, it's overwhelming, physical, a wall of sound that hits like a shockwave. The Marines on the line freeze, confused, hearts hammering. The Japanese react worse. They panic. Some stand up, exposing themselves against the dark sky. Others break and run. A few drop their charges and scramble for cover. The carefully coordinated attack dissolves into chaos in seconds. And into that chaos, Cross pours fire. "All guns, open up!" Vasquez hammers the bowgun. Tracers streak into the mass of running figures. Webb traverses the turret, firing the coaxial in long, sweeping bursts. The .50 caliber on the turret roof, manned by Cross himself, roars, sending heavy rounds downrange. The other Shermans in the line join in. Then the Marine riflemen in the foxholes. Then the machine gun teams. The sugarcane field becomes a killing ground. The attack breaks completely. The survivors flee into the darkness. When silence finally returns, 42 bodies lie scattered across the approach. Not a single Japanese soldier reached the Marine line. Not one. Cross slumps in the hatch, ears ringing, hands shaking. They'd done it. One crazy idea. One piece of salvaged Navy equipment. One night. But wars aren't won in one night. Over the next week, word spreads. Other tank crews hear about C-23's foghorn, about the night attack that broke before it started. Captain Morrison mentions it in a briefing. A reporter from Stars and Stripes interviews Cross, scribbles notes, promises to write something up. Engineers from division headquarters show up, measure the horn, take photographs, ask questions about electrical draw and mounting specifications. Some crews laugh, some call it ridiculous, some call C-23 the foghorn leghorn, and make jokes about cartoon characters and loud roosters. But when the Japanese attack again 3 nights later, this time targeting a different section of the line, nobody's laughing. 8 Marines die. 2 tanks take satchel charges to the engine decks and burn. The crews barely escape. The next morning, 5 tank commanders approach Morrison. They want foghorns, all of them. Now. Morrison pulls strings, calls in favors, contacts every Navy ship offshore. Within 48 hours, they've scrounged 7 more horns. Some from damaged ships, some from vessels willing to part with spares. One from a supply depot that doesn't ask questions. By June 25th, 8 tanks in C Company carry the modification. By June 28th, every tank in the 2nd Marine Division has one. The Japanese adapt. Of course they do. They always adapt. They try attacking from different angles. They try cutting the wires. They try timing their assaults during artillery barrages, hoping the noise will mask their approach. But the psychological damage is done. The sound of that horn, that deep shipborne roar erupting in the darkness, becomes associated with death, with ambush, with failure. Japanese prisoners, interrogated later, mention it. They call it The voice of the devil ship. They say it made them think American warships had driven onto land. They say it made them question their orders, their tactics, their chances. One prisoner, a corporal from the 136th Infantry Regiment, speaks through a translator. His hands shake as he talks. We were told the Marines slept in their tanks at night, that we could destroy them easily. But then, that sound. Like nothing in nature. Like a demon screaming. We thought we were surrounded. That the fleet had somehow moved inland. How do you fight a ship on land? The translator pauses, looks at the interviewer. He wants to know, was it actually a ship's horn? The interviewer, a young lieutenant from intelligence, smiles. Yes, it was. The prisoner nods slowly. We should have known. Americans are clever with machines. By July 9th, Saipan is declared secure. The cost, 3,126 Americans dead, 13,099 wounded. The Japanese garrison, nearly 30,000 men, is annihilated. Only 921 surrender. The rest die fighting or commit suicide, convinced that capture means torture and death. C-23 survives. All 5 crew members walk off the island. No Purple Hearts, no Bronze Stars for the Foghorn. Just the quiet satisfaction of living through something that should have killed them. They ship out to Tinian, then Iwo Jima, then Okinawa. The Foghorn goes with them, bolted to the rear deck, wired and ready. They use it 11 more times. It saves their lives at least twice, maybe 3 times. Hard to say for certain. War doesn't come with a scoreboard. After the surrender, Cross writes a letter to Lieutenant Patterson, the Navy officer who'd offered them the horn in the first place. Tracks him down through naval records, sends it to an address in San Diego. The letter is brief. Sir, you probably don't remember me, but I wanted you to know, that foghorn you gave us in June saved a lot of lives. I don't know if they give medals for lending equipment, but they should. Thank you. Respectfully, Lieutenant William Cross, USMC. Patterson writes back 3 months later. His response is even briefer. Lieutenant, I remember. Glad it helped. Next time you're in San Diego, first beers on me. Fair winds and following seas. Patterson. Cross frames both letters. Hangs them in his study after the war. When people ask about them, he tells the story. Always starts the same way. June 1944. Saipan. We borrowed a ship's foghorn. And every time people lean in. Every time they listen. Because it's the kind of story that shouldn't be true but is. The kind that reminds us that war, even at its darkest, leaves room for human ingenuity, for improvisation, for the desperate brilliance that emerges when survival demands it. The foghorn itself? Lost to history. Maybe it's still rusting on some Pacific island, half buried in jungle. Maybe it got salvaged, melted down, turned into something else. Maybe it sits in a warehouse somewhere, unrecognized, gathering dust beside 1,000 other pieces of metal that once mattered. But the idea survives. In documents, in after-action reports, in the memories of men who heard that sound on a dark night and lived because of it. And that, perhaps, is enough. Somewhere, right now, someone is listening to this story. Maybe you're driving to work. Maybe you're washing dishes. Maybe you're sitting in a quiet room, eyes closed, letting the words paint pictures in your mind. Wherever you are in the world, from the beaches Holloway and Cross fought on, to cities that didn't exist when they were young, thank you for listening. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're hearing this from. Every listener connects us back to those who served, those who improvised, those who survived. Your attention honors their memory. July 10th, 1944. Garapan, Saipan's shattered capital. The battle is officially over. The flags have been raised, the reports filed, the casualty lists begun. The newspapers back home will write that Saipan has fallen, as if an island could somehow trip and hit the ground. But for the men of the 2nd Marine Division, and for the tankers of C Company, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like exhaustion. The streets of Garapan are rubble. Roofless concrete shells line avenues choked with debris. Power lines hang in tangled loops, swaying gently in the sea breeze. Here and there, fires still smolder, slow, stubborn embers of a conflagration that has burned for nearly a month. The smell is layered: wet earth, burned fuel, rotting flesh, and beneath it all the sharp metallic tang of rusting steel and spent ammunition. C-23 sits at a crossroads that used to lead to a school, a police station, and a row of shops. Now it leads nowhere. Holloway has the engine idling at a low RPM, letting the big radial cough and settle after a maintenance check. Webb is on the turret roof, cleaning the .50 caliber. Vasquez sorts belts of ammunition, checking each round by touch. Chen stands by a pile of 75mm crates, marking what's left with a piece of charcoal. Inside the turret, Cross flips through a battered notebook. He's not writing poetry or reflections. He's sketching. On one page is a crude outline of Saipan, ridgelines, fields, the rough trace of the paths they took from the beach to Garapan. On another page are diagrams of Japanese positions, machine gun nests in the trees, dug-in 47mm guns with overlapping arcs of fire, infantry strongpoints protected by wire and mines. But the page he pauses over is different. It shows a Sherman from the side and rear, drawn with the practiced lines of someone who has stared at that shape for thousands of hours. On the rear deck, above the engine grills, is the outline of the foghorn. Beneath it he's written 3 words in capital letters. Initial night response. Morrison walks up, boots crunching on broken glass. He waits until Cross finishes a line before speaking. Still thinking about that horn? Cross glances up. Trying to get it right, sir. Morrison lights a cigarette, cupping the match from the wind. Right? It worked, Lieutenant. I don't know how you measure that kind of thing, but my gut says you saved more than your crew with that contraption. The men talk about it. The Japanese talk about it. That's as close to proof as we get out here. Cross nods. That's the thing, Captain. It worked here, on this island, with these approaches. But Tinian's next. Then maybe Guam. Maybe somewhere else after that. Different ground, different tactics. We got lucky they came at us in the open. Morrison exhales smoke. Luck favors the prepared. Yes, sir. But I don't want to build doctrine on luck. He taps the notebook. I want to understand why it worked. How much of it was surprise? How much was psychology? How much was timing? So the next crew who tries it isn't just copying us. They're improving on it. Morrison studies him silently for a long moment. You know, Cross, if you live through this war, somebody's going to want you writing manuals. Cross looks away, out over the ruined streets. I'd rather be where I can see if the manual works. Careful, Morrison says softly. That kind of thinking keeps a man in uniform longer than he plans. They stand together in silence. A jeep rattles past, loaded with Signal Corps men, their cameras wrapped in oilcloth. A line of Japanese civilians, watched by Marine guards, makes its way slowly toward an improvised camp. Women carrying children, old men limping, faces blank with shock. The war has moved on from Saipan, but its weight lingers, settling into everything and everyone. By late afternoon, orders come down. 2nd Marine Division will rest and refit on Saipan for 2 weeks, then move to Tinian. C Company's tanks will undergo maintenance, track replacement, gun relining, and whatever field modifications can be safely standardized. The foghorns, once a strange curiosity mounted on a single vehicle, are now to be considered official, on paper, at least for this division, in this theater. Major Harlan Davis, the division's ordnance officer, calls a briefing in a commandeered schoolhouse overlooking the sea. It is a surreal setting for discussing the machinery of war. Faded Japanese charts still hang on the walls, maps of the home islands, diagrams of the human skeleton, kanji characters carefully inked in lines across a blackboard. The desks have been pushed aside. In their place, a folding table has been set up with samples of equipment, a section of tank track, a mangled bogey wheel, a welded plate of improvised armor, and on one end, like some strange brass idol, a foghorn assembly set on a crate. Cross sits with other tank commanders on rough benches. Morrison stands at the back, arms folded. Marine mechanics line the walls, their hands stained with grease, eyes sharp, absorbing every detail. Major Davis, a thick-set man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent squint, clears his throat. Gentlemen, we are, as you all know, fighting a learning enemy. The Japanese are not stupid, and they are not inflexible. They've adapted to our tactics from Guadalcanal onward. They've learned to fear our tanks during the day. So they've looked for ways to negate that advantage at night. He gestures toward a photograph tacked to the blackboard. It shows the hull of a Sherman with a blackened, twisted crater in the engine deck. The metal is peeled back like a flower. Smoke stains radiate outward. This is C-17, knocked out on the night of June 22nd by a satchel charge. Crew was lucky. 3 wounded, 2 concussed, but they got out. Later that same week, C-5 and C-9 were lost the same way. You know the story. You were here. He steps aside, revealing a second photograph, grainy, taken from a low angle across a field at night. In the foreground is a line of foxholes. In the midground, silhouetted against a faint horizon, is the distinctive shape of a Sherman, Above it, squarish and strange, is the darker outline of a horn. We needed a counter. Our friend Lieutenant Cross and his crew volunteered a unique solution. A few quiet chuckles ripple through the room. Davis allows himself the slightest smile. Now, Ordnance does not usually make a habit of endorsing untested improvisation. We prefer incremental upgrades, factory-approved kits, things that can be documented and replicated. But the battlefield out here does not respect our peacetime preferences. He taps the photo. This modification works. Not because it adds armor, not because it kills more efficiently, but because it attacks the enemy where he has always been strongest, in his mind. He turns to Cross. Lieutenant, stand up. Walk us through it. Cross rises, feeling more exposed than he did under fire. He steps to the front, picks up a piece of chalk, and turns to the board. He draws the rough outline of a defensive perimeter. Tank positions, fields of fire, likely Japanese infiltration routes. The enemy doctrine, he begins, relies on stealth, proximity, and shock. They believe, and with good reason, that a tank at night is half blind. Its crew is fatigued. Its supporting infantry are dug in, not patrolling. If they can get within 20 or 30 yards, they can disable or destroy the vehicle with charges or mines. He taps a line on the board. Our challenge is to break their attack cycle before they reach decisive range. Traditionally, we might use trip flares, listening posts, increased sentries. Those help, but they're reactive. The enemy knows how to avoid them. He circles the tanks. The foghorn gave us something different. It let us seize the initiative in the instant of first contact. Instead of waiting until they were close enough to see, we made their first approach the most dangerous part for them, not for us. Davis leans against the table, watching. Cross continues. The horn is loud beyond anything they've encountered on land. It's foreign to their expectations. Their officers have trained them to face rifles, machine guns, even artillery. They have not trained them to withstand what sounds like the roar of a battleship suddenly at their feet. He sets down the chalk. The night we first employed it, we waited until the enemy was inside 100 yards, within effective range of our machine guns, but still outside reliable grenade and satchel charge distance. When we triggered the horn, their formation disintegrated. Many of them stood up or turned, exposing themselves. That gave us the silhouettes we needed to make our fire far more effective than it would have been against prone, crawling figures. We multiplied our killing power not by adding rounds, but by shaping the target. A mechanic from the back raises a hand. Sir, what about us? The Marines on the line. First time you fired that thing, half of us nearly jumped out of our skins. Cross nods. That's a valid concern. Surprise cuts both ways. But we found that once our own men knew what to expect, their reaction time improved. Commands went down the line. When you hear the horn, get your guns up and be ready to fire towards pre-briefed sectors. It became a signal, not a shock. Davis takes over again. Precisely. We're filing a provisional field memo through division. When tanks equipped with horns occupy defensive positions, all nearby infantry units will be briefed. The horn's use will be pre-coordinated. It will signal not just contact, but a specific phase of the enemy's approach. He looks over the group. Gentlemen, we are in uncharted territory. You are writing the book as you fight. I want you to think of this horn not just as a noisemaker bolted to the back of a tank, but as an indicator that the battlefield itself has changed. We are no longer just trading blows. We are shaping the enemy's fear. He rests his hands on the table. His voice softens. Use it wisely. Use it sparingly. Surprise loses value with repetition. But as we move to Tinian, to Guam, perhaps beyond, remember that the small odd things you improvise in the field can send ripples far beyond your own foxhole. The meeting breaks up. Outside, beneath a sky streaked with the last light of day, Cross and his crew return to C-23. Holloway sits on the rear deck, leaning back against the warm metal, looking out toward the sea. You ever think, he says quietly, about how weird this will sound to somebody reading about it in 50 years? Oh yeah, they scared off Japanese tank hunters with a ship's horn strapped to a tank. Sounds like something a drunk uncle makes up at Thanksgiving. Vasquez laughs softly. Yeah, and the kids will roll their eyes. Sure, Uncle Jim. Tell us again about the magic horn that won the war. Chen says nothing. He just runs his hand over the horn's casing, fingertips tracing dents left by shrapnel from some previous battle on some other sea. Webb, staring at the horizon, finally speaks. If they're laughing, he says, It'll mean we got to grow old enough to be uncles. I can live with that. The 2 weeks pass slowly. There is maintenance to do. Always maintenance. Tracks must be checked link by link. Bogie wheels inspected for hairline cracks. Final drives opened, cleaned, re-greased, engines tuned. Radios calibrated, guns bore-sighted, ammunition sorted, defective rounds culled. Armor welds reinforced where hastily applied plates have worked loose under stress. The foghorn too must be maintained. Its motor is not designed for island humidity, for dust and grit and salt. Chen disassembles it twice, cleaning the contacts, checking the brushes, oiling the bearings lightly so as not to attract too much dirt. He treats it like a secondary weapon system, not an oddity, because that is what it has become. In the evenings, when the worst heat of the day has faded, Cross walks the perimeter of their bivouac. He sees other Shermans now, all with horns. Some mounted neatly, following the pattern Davis's men drew up. Others bolted on in cruder fashion, at odd angles, painted over in fresh olive drab that doesn't quite match the sun-faded original. He hears stories. In one sector, a horn blast triggered early, by a nervous crewman who thought he heard movement. The Japanese weren't there yet. But when they arrived 10 minutes later, they found a force already keyed up, rifles sighted on likely approaches. The attack died in its first minute. In another, a horn cable burned out from a short. The crew tried to jury-rig a fix in the dark, only for the enemy to appear at the moment they had the rear deck open. A rifle grenade exploded nearby, showering the tank with fragments. Nobody died, but the lesson was clear. Improvisation is powerful, but it must be made reliable. On the 12th day, a courier arrives from division headquarters carrying a small packet for Cross. Inside is a typed memorandum, field improvisation, audio disruption device, M4 series. Below the dry heading is a summary of C-23's use of the horn, with notes and recommendations. At the bottom are two signatures, Major Davis's and that of the division commander. A handwritten note is clipped to the corner. Lieutenant, consider this the beginning of your manual. Davis. Cross folds the memo carefully and tucks it into his notebook. The war will not wait long for all this paperwork. July 23, 1944. Northern shore of Tinian Island. The invasion fleet sits off the coast, gray shapes against a blue-green sea. Tinian is smaller than Saipan, flatter but no less defended. Sugarcane fields stretch inland, crisscrossed by roads and drainage ditches. Japanese positions are dug in along the known beaches, so the Americans don't land on the known beaches. Under cover of darkness, Navy underwater demolition teams have cleared two tiny strips of coral reef on the less defended northwest coast. Engineers have dubbed them White Beach 1 and White Beach 2. Too narrow, the Japanese thought, for a serious landing. They were wrong. At 7:40 a.m., Marines of the 4th Division go ashore in LVTs, grinding over coral into shallow water. At 9:00 a.m., C-23 follows, rolling down the ramp of an LST onto Tinian's sandy shore. The foghorn is there, bolted firmly in place. It looks out of place against palms and sugarcane, as if it has somehow taken a wrong turn from a New England harbor. But it belongs to them now, just as much as the welded tracks and the scar on the glacis from Tarawa. The first day on Tinian is strangely quiet compared to Saipan. Artillery still crashes. Bullets still snap. Men still die. But the Japanese have fewer troops here, and many of their guns have been destroyed by bombardment. The Marines push inland steadily, capturing the high ground that dominates the island's airfields by the second day. Yet if the enemy can no longer meet them in massed daylight battle, he will revert to what he has used so often: night. On the third night, C-23 is assigned to a hedgerow just beyond a captured sugar processing plant. The plant's metal tanks stand black against the sky, jagged holes chewed in their sides by shells. The smell of burned molasses hangs in the air, sickly sweet and cloying. The perimeter is thinner than on Saipan. The lines have stretched. The Marines hold more ground with fewer men. Cross feels that thinness like a draft. Same drill, he tells his crew as the sun sinks into the sea. We hold here. We've got infantry on both flanks, but not as many as before. If they come, they'll look for the seams. We're one of them. Vasquez checks his bowgun. Think they've heard the horn by now? Maybe, Cross says. Word travels. But knowing a thing exists is different from facing it. Chen finishes stacking 75mm rounds in the ready rack. What if they figured out how to use it against us? Sneak in a small group, make noise somewhere else to draw our fire, hit us while we're aiming at ghosts. Webb chuckles. Listen to you thinking like a staff officer. Chen shrugs. You read enough intel briefings, you start thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. They're not going to keep running into the same trap forever. Cross is glad someone said it aloud. The thought has been nagging at him since they left Saipan. We'll run the horn on my command only, he says. No early blasts, no panic switches. If we sound it, it'll be because we're ready to exploit whatever it does to them. Not because we're afraid of the dark. The darkness comes more gently on Tinian than on Saipan. The sky is clearer, the stars sharper. The line between land and sea drawn in soft, rippling black. Crickets chirp. A breeze stirs the cane. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, feral, abandoned, confused by the sudden absence of its former masters. Midnight passes without incident. At 1:30, a flare arcs up 300 yards to their right, hissing phosphorescent light over the fields. A brief burst of machine gun fire, then silence. Probably a probe, Cross murmurs. Testing the line. At 2:05, they hear it, not scraping this time, not the careful, stealthy crawl of tank hunters. Marching, boots, many boots, moving in formation, web tenses. That's not tank hunters. No, Cross says slowly. It's not. Through his periscope, he sees shapes moving along a ridge line, a column of men, 5 or 6 abreast, silhouettes black against a slightly lighter sky. Their formation is ragged but unmistakable. Infantry, a lot of it. Moving quickly, not crawling. He flips to the radio. Red Dog Actual, this is 2-3. Possible enemy movement, bearing 080 from my position. Elevation Ridge 2. Static, then Morrison's voice clipped. Can you estimate numbers? Company-sized at least. They're moving east to west, parallel to our line. Looks like they're shifting, not attacking. Morrison swears under his breath on the other end. They're maneuvering to hit someone else. Keep eyes on. Do not engage unless they turn toward you. I'm waking the colonel. The column continues. Cross tracks it, heart thudding. If they stay on that path, they'll bypass C-23's position by 200 yards. If they turn south, they'll slam into a thinly held section of line where a rifle company from the 24th Marines has dug in among scattered rocks and low scrub. Minutes stretch. At 2:11, the head of the column reaches a low outcropping. Cross sees movement, officers gathering, whispering, gesturing. A pause, a decision. The column turns. South, toward the weak spot. Cross doesn't wait for orders. Driver, pivot us 10 degrees right. Gunner, orient coax toward the dip in the ridge. Loader, he ready. Vasquez, be ready to hose that gap if they start down. Holloway grinds the tank slightly to the right. The turret traverses with a muted whine. Over the radio, Morrison barks, 2-3, report. They're turning, sir. Heading straight toward 24th's sector. Hold fire, another voice cuts in. Colonel Marshall, regimental CO. We need to see if we can catch them in the open with artillery. Cross stares through his scope. In the faint starlight, he can see the first squads beginning to descend toward the Marines' line. If he waits, they'll be among the rocks and scrub by the time the artillery comes in. It will kill some of them. It will also kill Marines. He feels something like anger rise in his chest. Not at the colonel. At the situation. At the inevitability of men dying because he followed an order 2 seconds too long. Sir, he says into the radio. Recommend we disrupt their formation before they reach defilade. We have the horn. They're in perfect position for it. There's a pause. A brief, crackling silence where a career weighs options against instinct. Do it, Marshall says. Cross closes his eyes for a heartbeat. Then he opens them and flips the switch. The horn screams into the night. The column freezes. From their vantage point on the ridge, the Japanese soldiers have spent weeks listening to American naval guns, to artillery, to tanks, to aircraft, the full orchestra of industrial war. But they have not heard this. Not this close. Not without warning. The sound slams into them, echoing off the ridge, bouncing back, magnified. For an instant, they do not know where it comes from. Front, flank, rear, it seems to be everywhere at once. The formation shudders. Men duck instinctively. Some drop to the ground. Others swing their rifles upward as if an airplane were diving at them. Orders are shouted. Hands wave. Confusion breeds confusion. In that single stretched second, their line tightens. They bunch together. Artillery, already laid in and waiting for coordinates, does the rest. Morrison's voice is hard, calm, on the net. Red Dog, fire mission, grid 235 by 867. Target troop concentration on reverse slope. Battery 3, 3 rounds, fire for effect. The first American shells arrive 12 seconds after the last echoes of the horn die. They plunge into the massed Japanese company like hammer blows. White-orange blossoms erupt across the slope, silhouetting bodies thrown upward. The blasts roll down the hillside, shredding what had moments earlier been a disciplined movement. Cross watches, jaw clenched. This is not like the sugarcane field on Saipan, where tank hunters crawled toward his own position. Those men had been coming to kill him and his crew personally. These were attacking someone else. He has, in a sense, called down death on strangers. But that is the cold calculus of command. If he had waited, those strangers would have been the ones emerging suddenly among the rocks, satchel charges in hand, firing into foxholes at 10 yards. Men he knows by name, riflemen he has shared coffee and cigarettes with, would have died instead. On the hillside, a second salvo lands, then a third. The Japanese formation dissolves. Survivors stagger, retreat, or crawl into whatever shallow depressions they can find. The attack, as a coherent effort, is finished before it truly begins. In the aftermath, the Marines of the 24th record only sporadic contact. A few isolated groups reach their lines and are cut down quickly. No banzai charges. No coordinated rush, just fragments of a shattered plan. Later, in reports, the episode will be reduced to a few lines. 0208, 0215. Enemy company observed maneuvering for assault. Audio disruption device employed from C-23. Enemy cohesion broken. Artillery engaged with satisfactory effect. Friendly casualties, 4 wounded. Enemy casualties, estimated 80-100 KIA. The paper will not carry the sound, or the feeling, but the men will. In the gray light before dawn, Cross climbs down from the turret, boots crunching on dry earth. He walks to the edge of the ridge, where he can see down into the shallow valley the Japanese tried to cross. He can just make out darker shapes against the ground. Still, silent, scattered. He feels no triumph. Only a somber, heavy recognition of what has unfolded. Webb joins him, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. Hell of a thing, Webb says quietly. Cross nods. We didn't just scare them this time. We never just scared them, Webb replies. Not really. Fear's just the first step. There's always something behind it. You ever wonder, Cross asks, how they described us? When they went back to their officers, when they wrote reports. The Americans used a demon's voice. The land itself roared. Webb smiles sadly. Maybe. Or maybe they just wrote, the enemy used unexpected sound. We broke. They're soldiers too. Cross watches the first rays of dawn creep over the water. It's not the horn itself, he says. It's what it allows. It buys us a moment, a hesitation, a crack. Then we choose what to push through that crack. It could be fire, it could be a withdrawal, it could be mercy. Mercy, Webb says, surprised. Not tonight, Cross admits. But someday, somewhere else. A sound that says, stop, enough. I don't know, maybe that's foolish. Webb shakes his head. Nothing foolish about imagining an end to this. The war, of course, has no intention of ending yet. Tinian falls faster than Saipan. The Marines clear the island by the beginning of August. Work crews move in to transform the fields into runways long enough for the new B-29 superfortresses. Engineers measure, survey, lay steel matting. The foghorns on their tanks remain. Less dramatic now, less often used, but never removed. Orders arrive. 2nd Marine Division will return to Maui for rest and refit. Other units will go on to Peleliu, to Leyte, to Luzon. There is talk, vague, unconfirmed, of something larger still. A landing on the Japanese home islands. An invasion on a scale dwarfing even Normandy. C-23 is loaded once more onto an LST. The Pacific swallows the wake behind them as they leave the Marianas. On the voyage back, with no enemy beyond the horizon and no immediate battle to prepare for, the emptiness of time catches up with them. Men who've had every hour dictated, attack, dig, move, maintain, suddenly find themselves with afternoons where nothing is demanded but breathing. Holloway plays cribbage with a Navy signalman under a patch of shade on the tank deck. Vasquez writes letters home that he knows will be censored, crafting sentences that anger and tenderness and fatigue all fight to inhabit. Chen finds a dog-eared book in a ship's library, a collection of short stories from the 1930s, and reads until his eyes cross. Webb and Cross end up by the rail one evening, watching flying fish skip away from the bow. You ever think about what you'll do after? Webb asks. Cross keeps his gaze on the endless horizon. After what? The war. Silence stretches. Finally Cross sighs. I used to say I'd go back to school, finish my degree, maybe teach, history probably, tell kids about things like this, try to make sense of it. And now? Now. He trails off, searching for words. Now I'm not sure I know what after looks like. We keep getting orders for the next island, the next operation. Feels like a chain that doesn't end. Just links, one after another. The chain's gotta end somewhere, Webb insists. One way or another. Cross nods slowly. One way or another. He thinks of the horn. Of how something built for fog and collision avoidance in peacetime had become a weapon in their hands. He wonders what other things will be dragged from their intended purpose and hurled into this furnace before it's over. On Maui, time passes differently. The air smells of flowers and fresh-cut grass, not cordite and rot. The sounds are of traffic and music drifting from radios in town, not artillery and shouted orders. The ground beneath their feet is solid, not mud or coral or volcanic ash. They train, they repair. They attend memorial services for men who did not come back from Saipan and Tinian. Names are read in orderly rows. Cross listens as familiar syllables echo across an amphitheater, carried away on a gentle trade wind. Nobody mentions the horn. To those who have not faced satchel charges in the dark, such details of improvisation feel small. Insignificant perhaps beside the grand movements of fleets and armies. But among the tank crews, the stories persist. In motor pools, amid the clang of tools and the hum of machinery, men speak of the night on the ridge where the horn and the guns broke a company attack. They speak of the first time it sounded on Saipan. They speak of a Japanese prisoner who called it the demon's voice. And slowly, quietly, those stories spread beyond the division. A stateside ordnance officer visiting Maui to observe Pacific modifications scribbles notes as he walks among the tanks. Welded track armor. Cages of steel bars mounted over engine decks to deflect satchel charges. Extra 30s mounted in improvised pintles. And on some holes, brass and steel trumpets, painted the same dull green as everything else. What's this? He asks a mechanic. Foghorns, sir. From the fleet. The officer raises an eyebrow. Foghorns. On tanks. Yes, sir, the mechanic says. The Japs really don't like them. The answer makes its way into a report. The report crosses a desk in Washington. Someone frowns at the odd detail, underlines it, jots a question mark in the margin. Maybe they file it away as a curiosity. Maybe they see in it a hint of something larger, that the war is forcing everything, even peacetime tools, into new roles. The war moves on. Peleliu is a nightmare of rock and heat and stubborn resistance. Iwo Jima, a black wound in the ocean, devours Marines by the thousands. Okinawa, with its ridges and rain and civilians caught in the crossfire, brings the war to the very doorstep of Japan like a slow, grinding storm. C-23 does not go to Peleliu. It is held in reserve. It does go to Okinawa. By then, it is no longer young, even by the brutal standards of armored war. Its hull bears the scars of 3 campaigns. Welded plates make it look fatter, heavier, like a veteran who has grown thick with years of carrying weight. The horn on its rear deck is no longer shiny. Salt and time have dulled its surface, but it works. On Okinawa, the Japanese change tactics again. They do not throw away whole companies in wasteful banzai charges, at least not often. They dig in deeper than ever before, using caves and tombs and reverse slopes to turn each hill into a self-contained fortress. Their artillery is heavier, their anti-tank guns better sighted, their infantry more resigned perhaps, but no less determined. The horn finds new uses. In narrow draws, where tanks fear ambush from close rocky walls, a short blast before entering sometimes flushes hidden troops, forcing them to move, to betray their positions. In villages where civilians might be intermingled with soldiers, the horn, sounded once in warning, has on occasion sent non-combatants scurrying out before the fight begins in earnest. Not always. Not reliably. War remains cruel and imprecise. But the idea persists. Sound as a tool to shape the field before the first shot. One night, pinned near a ravine by a persistent sniper, Cross experiments. The sniper has good cover. Every time a Marine shows so much as a helmet above a parapet, there's a crack and a bullet thuds into earth inches away. The line cannot advance. Artillery is too blunt an instrument. The ravine is too close. The overhead is poor. Cross thinks of the prisoner who spoke of the devil ship's voice. He positions the tank carefully, hold down as much as the terrain allows. He has the infantry mark the sniper's approximate perch with a flare thrown at an angle. Then, when all is ready, he orders every Marine in earshot to plug their ears and keep their heads down. The horn's bellow tears through the ravine. An odd thing happens. The sniper fires, instinctively perhaps, into the sudden noise. The muzzle flash, brief and small in the darkness, betrays his nest among the rocks. Webb sees it through his sight. One carefully placed 75mm high explosive shell follows. The sniper doesn't fire again. Afterward, Lieutenant Marks, the rifle platoon leader whose men had been pinned, claps Cross on the shoulder. "I'm starting to think I want one of those on my Jeep," he says, "just to scare my boys out of their bunks in the morning." Cross smiles. "Use it too much, they'll stop jumping." Men or Japs? Both. They stand there, sharing a laugh that comes out sounding more like a sigh. By the summer of 1945, the war has become a strange mix of mechanized slaughter and rumor. Rumor runs fast in a theater as large as the Pacific. One week, it's talk of a new German jet fighter over Europe. The next, whispers of a bomb so powerful it can destroy an entire city in a single flash. Men speak of it in foxholes and mess lines, half believing, half dismissing, because how could such a thing exist when they still spend their days measuring ground in yards? In early August, C-23 sits in a muddy field on the southern end of Okinawa. The crew have just learned that they will not be among the first wave of any invasion of Japan proper. Their unit is to be held in reserve, training for possible landings on Kyushu in November. There is talk of heavy casualties. Someone passes around a mimeographed estimate that makes stomachs churn. Hundreds of thousands of American dead. Millions of Japanese. Then, on August 6th, the news comes. A single bomb. Hiroshima. The words fall into the war-weary world like a stone into a still pond. At first, details are scarce. A new weapon of unusual destructive force. An entire city substantially destroyed. Arguments erupt in mess tents. Propaganda, one cynic says. They always exaggerate. No, says a signal sergeant who's overheard high-level traffic. It's real. Something about splitting atoms. Physics boys back home cooked it up. Cross listens, his mind struggling to reconcile the scale of what he's hearing with the intimacy of the battles he's fought. He thinks about a horn salvaged from a ship, about the way a single novel stimulus can reorder thought, can crack discipline, can tilt decisions in the space of a heartbeat. What then will such a weapon do? Not just to bodies, but to minds. 3 days later, Nagasaki. On August 15th, the Emperor's voice reaches them over the radio. Tinny, faint, filtered through static and translation. It speaks of enduring the unendurable, of accepting surrender to prevent further suffering. For many American soldiers, it is the first time they have ever heard a Japanese voice speaking not in defiance or insult, but in something like sorrow. In a muddy Okinawan field beneath a sky that has not yet learned how to be peaceful again, the crew of C-23 stand around a jerry-rigged loudspeaker listening to history change. When the announcement ends, when the cheering fades, when the reality of survival begins to sink in, Vasquez turns to Cross. "So that's it?" he asks. "We don't have to land on their beaches? No more night hunters? No more horns?" Cross looks back at the tank. The horn sits there, silent, its wide mouth pointed toward a horizon that will soon no longer belong to war. "I think she's done her part," he says. Holloway frowns. "What happens to her now?" "Regulations will say we strip non-standard equipment before shipping the tank home," Chen says automatically. "Turn everything back to factory spec. That's what they always say." Webb shakes his head. "After all this, she deserves better than being tossed in a scrap heap." Cross rests his hand on the horn's casing. "Maybe," he says slowly. "We don't let her end up anonymous." He doesn't know exactly how, not yet, but the thought has taken root, not just of survival, of memory, of making sure that when people talk about this war, they understand that it wasn't won just by the big things, the battleships, the bombers, the terrible new weapons unleashed from the sky, but also by the small, strange, desperate ideas that men came up with in the dark. Ideas like strapping a ship's foghorn to a tank and daring the enemy to keep their courage when the world itself seemed to scream at them. That night, in a rare quiet moment, Cross opens his notebook. On a fresh page he writes, "Saipan, June 1944, and begins to record, in as much detail as his memory allows, the first night they used the horn. Not to glorify, not to boast, to preserve. He does not know who will read it. A future historian, A nephew. A fellow tanker years from now, facing different enemies in different places. Or maybe nobody, but he writes anyway. Because some sounds fade quickly from the world. The crack of a rifle, the whine of a shell. Others linger long after the last echo has died, carried forward in speech and ink, and the quiet moments when old men sit and tell stories to younger ones who think such things are impossible. The horn will never blow in battle again. Yet in another, slower way, its voice is only beginning to be heard. September 12, 1945, Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan. The war is over, but its machinery grinds on. American ships fill the harbor. Destroyers, cruisers, carriers, their gray hulls bearing scars from battles fought across half the world. Ashore, Marines and soldiers move through the strange new work of occupation. They guard supply depots. They patrol streets where civilians bow and avert their eyes. They process mountains of paperwork that will transform enemies into defeated subjects, combatants into something else entirely. C-23 sits in a motor pool near the docks, surrounded by 24 other Shermans awaiting disposition. Some will be scrapped. Others will be kept for occupation duty, patrolling roads and cities until a more permanent peace settles. A few, the newest, the least battle-worn, might be shipped back to bases in California or Hawaii for use in training. The foghorn is still there. Regulations say it should have been removed weeks ago. The field modification order that blessed its use was specific to combat operations in the Central Pacific. Combat is over. Ergo, the horn should be stripped, catalogued, and returned to Navy stores. But nobody has come for it yet. Cross suspects Morrison has something to do with that. The captain has a way of losing paperwork when it suits him, of forgetting to pass certain orders down the chain. In the chaotic final weeks of August, amid surrender ceremonies and victory parades and the endless shuffling of men and machines, a single brass horn on a single tank is easy to overlook. The crew knows its time is short. Holloway has already received his orders. He'll ship out in 3 days, bound for San Diego, and then discharge, back to Pennsylvania and the machine shop and a world where tanks are things you read about, not live inside. Vasquez leaves a week after that. Chen has been reassigned to an occupation unit farther north. Somebody decided his language skills might be useful. Though he speaks Cantonese and most Japanese speak, well, Japanese. Webb is going home to Tennessee. Cross will stay in Japan for another month, helping with transition duties, then rotate back to the States for demobilization. They gather one last time around C-23 on a cool evening, the sun sinking behind the distant mountains, painting the harbor in shades of orange and purple. Nobody speaks for a long time. Then Holloway breaks the silence. "I've been thinking," he says quietly. "About what happens to her. The horn, I mean." Vasquez nods. "Yeah, me too. It saved our lives," Chen says. "More than once. Feels wrong to just let it rust in some warehouse." Webb leans against the hull. "You know what'll happen if we leave it on the tank. Some supply sergeant will inventory it, mark it down as unauthorized modification, cut it off with a torch and toss it in a scrap bin. Never mind what it did. Never mind the men who didn't die because of it." Cross has been wrestling with this for weeks. He thinks of the notebook tucked in his pack, now filled with pages of detailed observations, sketches, after-action notes. He's documented everything he can remember about the horn. The mounting, the wiring, the tactics, the results. But documentation is not the same as preservation. Words on paper can describe a thing. They cannot save it. "I've got an idea," he says slowly. "But it's going to sound a little crazy." "Crazy's our specialty," Vasquez says with a tired grin. Cross pulls out a folded map of Yokosuka and spreads it across the engine deck. "There's a war museum being set up in Tokyo," he begins. "The occupation authorities want to preserve certain artifacts, Japanese equipment mostly, things that show their military capability. But I heard they're also accepting American donations, items that tell the story of the Pacific War from our side." Webb raises an eyebrow. "You want to donate the horn to a museum?" "Not just the horn, the whole story. I've been writing it down. If we can get the horn into the right hands, with the right documentation, it won't just be a piece of brass sitting in a display case. It'll be a reminder of how wars are actually fought, not just with the big weapons, but with the small, strange ideas that come from desperation and ingenuity." Holloway considers this. "You think they'd take it?" "I don't know," Cross admits. "But I'm willing to try. Worst case, they say no and we figure something else out." Chen frowns. "What about regulations? Removing equipment without authorization?" Cross meets his gaze. I'll take responsibility. If anyone asks, I'll say I made the call. You all were just following orders. Like hell, Vasquez says immediately. We're all in this. We mounted it. We used it. We take credit together. The others nod. All right then, Cross says. Let's get to work. Over the next 2 days, working in stolen hours between their official duties, they carefully remove the foghorn from C-23's rear deck. It's harder than mounting it was. The welds have been stressed by months of use, heat cycles, vibration. Some of the bolts have corroded. Holloway works patiently with a wrench and penetrating oil, coaxing each fastener free without damaging the threads. Chen disconnects the electrical system, labeling each wire so that anyone who wants to understand the installation can follow the path. Webb photographs the process with a borrowed camera, precious color film, each shot carefully composed. He captures the horn from multiple angles, the mounting brackets, the wiring diagram sketched on a piece of cardboard. Documentation for the documentation. When they finally lift the horn free, it feels heavier than its 40 pounds. As if all the nights it screamed into darkness, all the lives it helped preserve, have added some invisible mass. They wrap it in canvas, tie it with cord, and load it into the back of a Jeep Cross has requisitioned for supply duties. The drive to Tokyo takes most of a day. The roads are rough, still pocked with shell craters and littered with debris. They pass through towns reduced to ash, fields abandoned mid-harvest, bridges rebuilt with timber and prayer. Civilians watch them pass, some with resentment, some with relief, most with the blank exhaustion of people who have survived something too large to comprehend. The museum is housed in a former government building near the Imperial Palace. American MPs guard the entrance. Inside, Japanese curators work alongside U.S. Army historians, sorting through mountains of artifacts, rifles, uniforms, maps, propaganda posters, the physical residue of war, waiting to be organized into narrative. Cross identifies himself to a harried-looking captain named Winters, who oversees the American Contribution Section. Lieutenant Cross, 2nd Marine Division, I have an item I'd like to submit for consideration. Winters barely looks up from his clipboard. What kind of item? A foghorn, modified for use on an M4 Sherman tank during night defensive operations in the Marianas and Okinawa campaigns. That gets Winters' attention. He sets down the clipboard. A foghorn, on a tank. Yes, sir. And you want to donate it to a museum. With full documentation, after-action reports, tactical assessments, photographs, crew testimonials. Winters blinks. Then, slowly, he smiles. Lieutenant, in the last 3 weeks, I have processed 17 samurai swords, 42 rifles, 9 flags, and 1 Type 95 tank that somebody drove through a wall. This is the first time anyone has brought me something genuinely strange. Come with me. He leads Cross to a back room where a Japanese curator, an older man in wire-rimmed glasses named Tanaka-san, is cataloging a collection of naval signal flags. Winters explains the situation in halting Japanese. Tanaka-san listens, nodding occasionally, then asks to see the horn. Cross and his crew carry it in, still wrapped in canvas. When they unwrap it, Tanaka-san's eyes widen slightly. He circles it, examining the mounting brackets, the scarred brass, the electrical connections. He asks questions through Winters. Technical questions about decibel levels, frequency, effective range. Cross answers as best he can, supplementing with sketches from his notebook. Finally, Tanaka-san steps back and speaks at length in Japanese. Winters translates. He says, "This is not a weapon, not in the traditional sense, but it is evidence of adaptation under pressure, of men using whatever tools they could find to survive. He believes it belongs in the collection, not as a trophy but as a lesson." Cross feels something unclench in his chest. "Tell him thank you." Tanaka-san bows. Cross bows back. "There's paperwork," Winters says. "Forms, provenance documentation. It'll take a few weeks to process, but I think we can make this work." Cross hands over his notebook, every page he's written about the horn, meticulously copied out in a second volume he'll keep for himself. "Everything's in here. Dates, locations, tactical employment, observed effects. If anyone wants to understand why we did this, it's all there." Winters flips through it, eyebrows rising. "Lieutenant, you ever think about writing for a living? Maybe someday. You should. This is good, clear, detailed, not just facts. There's humanity in it." Cross doesn't know what to say to that, so he just nods. Outside, back in the Jeep, the crew sits in silence for a moment. Then Vasquez speaks. "Think anyone will actually read all that? Or will it just sit in a file somewhere? I don't know. Cross says honestly. But at least it exists. That's more than most things get. They drive back to Yokosuka as the sun sets, the city lights beginning to glow in the gathering dark. The next morning, Holloway ships out. The farewells are brief. Men who have lived in each other's pockets for years find they don't have words for goodbye. Handshakes, nods, promises to write that may or may not be kept. Holloway pauses at the gangway, looks back at Cross. Take care of yourself, Lieutenant. You too, Sergeant. And if you ever make it to Pennsylvania, look me up. I'll show you how to fix a tractor. Cross smiles. Deal. Holloway walks up the gangway and disappears into the ship. One by one, the others leave too. Vasquez, Chen, Webb. Each departure peels away another layer of the shared identity they built in combat. They are no longer a crew. Just 5 men scattering back to separate lives, carrying private memories that will fade and shift and eventually become stories told at reunions, if they have reunions, if they stay in touch, if the distance and time don't erase what war pressed together. Cross stays in Japan through October. His duties are administrative, processing reports, coordinating supply handovers, attending meetings where former enemies sit across tables, and negotiate the mundane details of occupation. It is necessary work, important work. But it feels hollow after the sharp clarity of combat, where every decision had immediate, visible consequences. He visits the museum once more before he leaves. The horn is on display in a corner gallery dedicated to improvisation and field modification in the Pacific Theater. It sits on a pedestal, polished but not overly so, with a small placard in both English and Japanese explaining its purpose. Next to it is a photograph, one of Webb's color shots, showing the horn mounted on C-23's rear deck with the crew standing beside the tank. They look young, tired, real. The placard reads, Foghorn Assembly, salvaged from USS Maryland and modified for installation on M4A2 Sherman medium tank C-23, 2nd Marine Division, employed during night defensive operations on Saipan, Tinian, and Okinawa, June 1944, June 1945. The device produced high-decibel audio output intended to disorient and disrupt Japanese infantry attacking under cover of darkness. Credited with contributing to defensive successes in multiple engagements, donated by the crew of C-23, September 1945. Cross stands there for a long time, reading and rereading the words. A Japanese visitor, an elderly man with a cane, stops beside him, peers at the horn, reads the placard slowly. He turns to Cross and speaks in careful English. You were there? Cross hesitates, then nods. Yes, that was my tank. The man is silent for a moment. Then he says, My son was soldier, Saipan. He did not come home. Cross feels the weight of that statement settle over him like a blanket. I'm sorry. The man nods. War is difficult. For all. He gestures toward the horn. This is strange weapon, but honest, not hiding, just loud. Yes, Cross says quietly. Just loud. They stand together, 2 men on opposite sides of a chasm that will never fully close, looking at a piece of brass that once screamed into the night. Finally, the man bows slightly and walks away. Cross stays a while longer, then leaves the museum and does not return. November 1945, San Francisco, California. The ship that carries Cross home arrives under the Golden Gate Bridge on a foggy morning. The city appears slowly, revealed in pieces as the mist parts. Towers, hills, the grid of streets climbing upward from the water. Men line the rails, silent, watching. For many, this is the first glimpse of America they've had in 2 or 3 years. Some cry, others just stare, faces blank, as if they've forgotten how to process joy. Cross thinks about the horn. About how it was built to guide ships through fog like this, to warn of danger, to call out across distances that eyes could not penetrate. How it ended up in a war it was never designed for, doing things its makers never imagined. The ship docks. Processing takes hours. Paperwork, medical checks, debriefings, the machinery of demobilization grinding through men like wheat through a mill, sorting them back into the civilian world. By late afternoon, Cross is officially discharged. He stands on a street corner in his uniform, duffel bag at his feet, watching traffic flow past. Cars, buses, trolleys, the ordinary motion of a city that has been at peace for months while he was still an ocean away. He has no immediate plans, no job waiting, no family in California. He could go anywhere, do anything. The future is an open field, and for the first time in years, nobody is shooting at him while he crosses it. It should feel liberating. Instead, it feels disorienting. He picks up his duffel and starts walking. Over the next several months, Cross drifts. He returns to Michigan, to the small college town where he grew up. His parents are older, grayer, relieved to have him back but unsure how to talk to the man who left as a boy. They ask careful questions. He gives careful answers. The distance between what he lived and what they can understand is vast. He enrolls in school again, using the GI Bill. History, as he'd once planned. The lectures feel abstract. Professors talk about grand strategies, political alliances, economic factors. Nobody mentions foghorns on tanks. Nobody talks about the texture of fear at 0200 hours, or the way a man's hands shake after he's called down artillery on strangers. He writes, not for class, for himself. Long entries in the notebook he started on Okinawa, trying to capture details before they fade. The smell of the tank's interior, the sound of Webb's breathing over the intercom. The exact shade of orange a burning Hago turned in the darkness. In the spring of 1946, he receives a letter. It's from Vasquez, postmarked Los Angeles. The handwriting is familiar, the same blocky capitals Vasquez used to mark ammo crates. Cross. Hope this finds you. I'm back in LA, working at my uncle's garage. It's good, quiet, nobody shooting at me. But I keep thinking about the tank, about the horn. Did it end up in that museum like you wanted? I tell people the story sometimes and they look at me like I'm making it up. A foghorn? On a tank? Yeah, Eddie, sure. Anyway, if you're ever out this way, look me up. First beer's on me. Vasquez. Cross writes back immediately. Tells him yes, the horn made it into the museum. Describes the placard, the photograph, the Japanese visitor who lost his son on Saipan. He includes his address in Michigan, asks Vasquez to stay in touch. Over the next year, other letters trickle in. Holloway writes from Pennsylvania. He's married now, running the machine shop, teaching his younger brother the trade. He mentions the horn once, briefly. I think about that crazy thing sometimes when I'm working on an engine. How we took something meant for one job and bent it to another. That's what mechanics do, I guess. Make things work even when they shouldn't. Chen sends a postcard from San Francisco. No return address. Just a few lines. Still using what I learned. Different battles now. Hope you're well. TC. Cross wonders what battles Chen means, but the postcard offers no clues. Webb's letter is the longest. He's back in Tennessee, working as a hunting guide in the Smokies. He writes about the mountains, the silence, the way deer move through the forest like ghosts. Then, on the third page, he writes, I don't talk much about the war. Most folks around here don't ask. But I think about it. About you and the guys. About that night on the ridge when we stopped the Jap company before they hit the 24th. I used to think we were just lucky. Right place, right time, right equipment. But the more distance I get, the more I realize it wasn't luck. It was you, Cross. You saw something the rest of us didn't. A way to use sound like a weapon. And you had the guts to try it when most officers would have stuck to the manual. I don't know if you think about this stuff or if you've moved on. But I wanted you to know. You saved lives, not just ours. A lot of lives. That matters. Webb. Cross reads the letter 3 times, then he folds it carefully and places it in a box with the others. 1947 becomes 1948. 1948 becomes 1949. Cross finishes his degree. Considers graduate school. Takes a job teaching history at a high school in Grand Rapids. The students are young, impossibly young, born in the middle of the Depression, growing up in a world rebuilding itself. He teaches them about World War II. Not just the dates and battles, but the human elements, the decisions made under pressure, the improvisation, the cost. One day a student raises his hand. Mr. Cross, did you fight in the war? The classroom goes quiet. Cross has avoided this question for 3 years. But looking at these faces, curious, open, untouched by what he lived through, he realizes that silence is a choice, and sometimes the wrong one. Yes, he says simply. I was a tank commander in the Pacific. Another hand. Did you ever do anything, brave? Cross almost laughs. Brave. Such a simple word for such complicated moments. I don't know about brave, he says carefully. But I'll tell you about something strange we tried. It involved a foghorn and a tank and a very confused enemy. He tells the story. Not all of it. Not the blood and the fear and the bodies in the sugarcane. But the core of it. The problem. The improvisation. The result. The students listen, rapt. Afterward, as they file out, one boy lingers. Mr. Cross? That story about the horn. Is it true? Yes. Do you have pictures or anything? Cross thinks of the photograph in the museum, half a world away, of the notebook in his desk at home, of the letters in the box. I have some things, he says. Maybe I'll bring them in sometime. The boy nods eagerly and leaves. Cross sits at his desk, alone in the empty classroom, and realizes something. The horn is gone. The tank is gone. The crew is scattered. But the story remains. And stories, told often enough, with enough care, become their own kind of preservation. That night he opens his notebook and begins to write. Not scattered observations now, but a structured narrative. Beginning, middle, end, the spark and the struggle and the payoff. He writes about Kellerman, the Navy machinist's mate whose name he learned later, who probably never knew that the foghorn he helped load onto a truck would end up changing battles. He writes about Morrison's dry humor and Davis's cautious endorsement and the Japanese corporal who called it the voice of the devil ship. He writes for 3 months. The result is a manuscript, 60 pages typed on a borrowed typewriter, titled simply The Foghorn, Innovation Under Fire in the Pacific, 1944-1945. He's not sure what to do with it. Publishers? It's too short for a book, too specific for a general audience. Academic journals? It's too personal, too narrative. Military publications? Maybe, but he doesn't have the connections. So he puts it in a drawer. 1950 arrives. Then the Korean War. Tanks roll again, this time in different mountains against a different enemy. Some of the lessons from the Pacific apply. Others don't. Cross follows the news, reads the dispatches, wonders if anyone over there is trying anything as strange as a foghorn on a Sherman. He doesn't hear from most of the crew anymore. Christmas cards from Holloway. The occasional postcard from Vasquez. Nothing from Chen or Webb in years. People drift. Memories fade. Life moves forward because it has to. Cross marries in 1952. A librarian named Helen, quiet and sharp, who listens to his stories without judgment and knows when to let silence speak for itself. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy, William Jr., asks about the war sometimes. Cross tells him selected pieces. The girl, Anne, prefers other topics. Cross doesn't push. The years accumulate. Cross is no longer young. His hair grays, his knees ache. The students in his classroom begin to look like children to him, which he supposes they are. The war recedes. Not forgotten, but distant. A thing that happened to a younger version of himself in a world that no longer exists. Then, in 1973, he receives a package. It's from Japan. The return address is the museum in Tokyo. Inside is a letter written in careful English. Dear Mr. Cross, we are undertaking renovations to our Pacific War Gallery and are updating provenance records for all items. We found your address through U.S. military archives and wanted to inform you that the foghorn device you donated in 1945 remains in our collection. It has been viewed by over 100,000 visitors and is frequently cited in educational programs about technological adaptation during wartime. We are preparing a new exhibit on innovation and would like to request permission to reproduce excerpts from your documentation, as well as photographs of the crew. Please let us know if this is acceptable. With respect, Curator Tanaka Hiroshi. Cross stares at the letter for a long time. 100,000 visitors. Educational programs. Still there, after 28 years. He writes back immediately. Yes. Use whatever you need. He includes copies of the photographs Webb took, prints he's kept safe in an album. He includes a copy of his manuscript, thinking maybe it will be useful for context. 3 months later, another letter arrives. Mr. Cross, thank you for your materials. Your manuscript is remarkable. Have you considered publishing it? We have contacts with several historical journals that might be interested. With your permission, we would like to forward it to them. Tanaka. Cross shows the letter to Helen. Well, she says, reading it over his shoulder. Looks like that drawer of yours is giving up its secrets. You think I should? I think, she says carefully, that you wrote it for a reason. Maybe it's time to let other people read it. In 1974, The Foghorn, Innovation Under Fire in the Pacific, 1944-1945, is published in the Journal of Military History. It's not a bestseller. It's not even widely read outside academic and military circles. But it's there, permanent, indexed. A record that says, this happened, these men lived it. This is how they solved an impossible problem. Cross receives a few letters in response. One is from a Marine Corps captain stationed at Quantico, teaching tactical innovation to officer candidates. He's using Cross's article as a case study. Your example demonstrates that effective solutions often come from lateral thinking rather than incremental improvement. Thank you for documenting it so thoroughly. Another is from a historian researching night combat in the Pacific. She's found references to the Foghorn in after-action reports from other units and wants to interview Cross for a book she's writing. And one, unexpected, emotional, is from Vasquez's daughter. Mr. Cross, my father passed away last year. When we were going through his things, we found letters you sent him. He kept them all. He also kept a notebook where he wrote about the war. Not much, just a few pages. But he mentioned you a lot. He said you were the best officer he ever served under. I thought you should know. Maria Vasquez. Cross sets that letter aside and allows himself for the first time in years to grieve. Not just for Vasquez. For all of them. For the men who didn't come home. For the ones who did but carried wounds that never healed. For the version of himself that climbed into a tank in 1943 and never fully climbed out. Cross retires from teaching. Helen passes quietly in her sleep. The Soviet Union begins to collapse, and the world Cross knew, defined by clear enemies and stark divisions, starts to dissolve into something more complicated. He's in his 70s now. The last veteran of a war that grows more distant with each passing year. He attends reunions when he can. The groups are smaller each time. Faces he once knew well are now hidden behind decades of aging. Names escape him. Details blur. But some things remain sharp. The sound of the horn. The feel of the tank lurching forward. Webb's calm voice over the intercom. Vasquez's quick hands. Chen's steady rhythm loading rounds. Holloway's unflappable driving. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the Saipan landing, Cross is invited to Japan. The museum is hosting a commemoration. Veterans from both sides will attend. There will be speeches, ceremonies, a chance to see the updated exhibit. Cross almost declines. He's old, tired. The trip would be long and difficult. But something pulls at him. He goes. The museum has changed, expanded, modernized. Interactive displays now supplement the artifacts. Video interviews play on screens. The Foghorn is still there in the same gallery, but surrounded by additional context, maps, photographs, oral histories from Marines and Japanese soldiers. Standing in front of it, Cross feels time collapse. He's 23 again. He's in the turret. The horn is about to sound. Everything is about to change. A voice beside him in English. Excuse me, are you Lieutenant Cross? He turns. A Japanese man, perhaps in his 60s, stands with a younger woman who appears to be translating. Yes, Cross says. I am. The man bows. The woman translates as he speaks. My father was a soldier on Saipan. He survived the battle and lived until 1989. Before he died, he told me about a night when his unit tried to attack American tanks. He said they heard a sound, like a ship screaming. He said it saved his life. Cross blinks. Saved his life? Yes. The sound made him hesitate. Made him think. In that moment, he decided to retreat instead of continue the attack. He said most of his unit died that night. But he lived because he chose fear over courage. The woman pauses, then continues translating. He wanted me to find the men who made that sound. To thank them for giving him the chance to survive. To come home. To have a family. I am his son because of what you did. Cross doesn't trust himself to speak. The man reaches into his bag and pulls out a small package, wrapped in cloth. This is for you. From him. Cross unwraps it carefully. Inside is a simple wooden box. Inside the box, on a bed of rice paper, is a small brass bell, the kind used in Buddhist temples. He said sound is powerful, the woman translates. It can destroy or it can save. He wanted you to have this, a sound for peace. Cross holds the bell gently. It's cool and smooth in his palm. Thank you, he manages. Please tell your father. Tell his memory that I'm grateful he survived. That I'm glad he had a family. That's what we all wanted. To go home. They stand together for a moment, two men connected by a night 50 years gone, by a sound that changed everything, by the strange mathematics of war, where fear becomes mercy and hesitation becomes life. Later, at the commemoration ceremony, Cross is asked to speak. He stands at a podium, looking out at a room filled with veterans, historians, students, families. American flags and Japanese flags hang side by side. He's not sure what to say. Then he thinks of the bell in his pocket, of the horn in the case behind him, of sounds that echo across time. He begins, 50 years ago, I was a young lieutenant who thought he understood war. I didn't. None of us did. War doesn't wait for understanding. It demands action, decision, improvisation. Sometimes you make the right choice. Sometimes you get lucky. Often, you can't tell the difference. He gestures toward the horn. That device started as something meant to prevent collisions in fog. It ended up preventing collisions of a different kind. Men meeting in the dark with nothing but violence between them. It gave us a moment, a hesitation, a chance to choose how to use that moment. We chose to survive. Others chose the same. Some didn't get to choose at all. He pauses, looking at the faces. I'm told 100,000 people have seen this horn. I hope they understand it's not about the machine. It's about what happens when ordinary people face impossible situations. They adapt. They improvise. They take what they have and bend it toward survival. That's not heroism. That's humanity. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out the bell, holds it up. I received this today from the son of a Japanese soldier who heard our horn on Saipan. He said it saved his father's life by making him hesitate, by giving him a moment to think instead of act. I don't know if I believe that. Wars aren't clean enough for such simple cause and effect. But I choose to believe it anyway. Because believing it means that sound, noise, vibration, the simple physics of air moving, can be more than a weapon. It can be a warning, a chance, a doorway to a different choice. He sets the bell on the podium. It rings softly. We can't undo the past. We can't bring back the dead or erase the suffering, but we can remember why we fought, not for the joy of battle, but for the chance to go home, to have families, to live in a world where foghorns guide ships and bells mark prayer, and the loudest sounds we hear are laughter and music and the voices of children who will never know what it's like to crouch in a tank at 200 hours, waiting for death to crawl out of the darkness. He steps back from the podium. The room is silent. Then someone begins to clap. Then another. Then the whole room, American and Japanese alike, rising to their feet. Cross doesn't feel like he deserves it. But he accepts it, because that's what veterans do. They carry the weight for those who weren't there, who can't know, who must be allowed to live without that knowledge. After the ceremony, he stands once more in front of the horn. An American journalist approaches, notebook in hand. Mr. Cross, can I ask you something? After everything you've been through, after all the years, when you look at this horn now, what do you feel? Cross considers the question. Gratitude, he says finally. For the men I served with, for the moments we had to improvise and did, for the chance to grow old when so many didn't. And maybe a little awe, that something so simple could matter so much. Do you think it changed the war? Cross smiles slightly. No. The war was too big for any one thing to change. But it changed some nights, some battles, some lives. That's enough. The journalist scribbles notes. One last question. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, standing on Saipan in June 1944, what would you tell him? Cross doesn't hesitate. I'd tell him to listen, to his crew, to his instincts, to the sounds of the night. And I'd tell him that this strange idea he's about to try, the one that seems crazy and desperate, is going to work. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough. He looks at the horn one last time. And I'd tell him that 50 years later he'll stand in a museum in Tokyo, holding a bell given to him by the son of a man who lived because of a sound. That he'll see proof that improvisation and humanity can coexist, even in war. That would mean something to him, I think. To know the story doesn't end in the dark. The journalist thanks him and walks away. Cross stays a while longer, alone with the horn and his memories. Then he turns and walks out into the Tokyo afternoon, where the city hums with traffic and life, where the sounds are ordinary and beautiful and entirely, blessedly peaceful. June 15, 2004. Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands. 60 years to the day. The island has changed beyond recognition. Where Marines once stormed ashore under fire, tourists now lounge on white sand beaches, sipping drinks with paper umbrellas. Where sugarcane fields became killing grounds, resorts sprawl across manicured lawns. Where Cross once sat in a tank, waiting for death to crawl out of the darkness, a highway now carries rental cars toward diving sites and historical markers. But some things remain. The ridges still rise in the distance, their slopes covered in dense jungle that has reclaimed the scars. The sea still rolls against the reef with the same patient rhythm. And in a small memorial park overlooking Garapan, a monument stands, black stone carved with names, American and Japanese, arranged not by nationality but alphabetically, as if death had erased all other distinctions. William Cross stands before the monument, 83 years old now, leaning on a cane, his son beside him. William Jr. is 52, a civil engineer from Seattle, patient and attentive in the way adult children become when they realize their parents are mortal. He's taken time off work to accompany his father on this journey, a final pilgrimage, though neither of them has spoken that word aloud. Cross traces a finger down the names. He's looking for one in particular. There. PFC James Murphy, 2nd Marine Division, June 17, 1944. Murphy was in the rifle company that C-23 supported during the first week on Saipan. A kid from Ohio, 19 years old, who'd shared cigarettes with Cross one evening and talked about his girlfriend back home, about how he planned to propose when he got back, about the ring he'd hidden in his pack. He died 2 days later. A sniper's bullet. Cross wasn't there when it happened, but he heard about it. Added the name to a list he kept in his notebook, men he'd known, however briefly, who didn't make it home. Over the decades, the list grew long. "You okay, Dad?" William Jr. asks quietly. Cross nods. "Yeah, just remembering." They walk slowly along the memorial path. Information plaques describe the battle in clinical terms. Troop movements, casualty figures, strategic objectives. The language is precise, sanitized, necessary for public consumption. But it can't capture what it felt like. The heat, the fear, the smell. Another plaque catches Cross's eye. It's newer than the others, installed perhaps 5 or 10 years ago. The title reads, "Innovation in Combat, the Foghorn Modification." Cross stops. Below the title is a photograph, the same one Webb took in 1944, showing C-23 with the horn mounted on the rear deck, the crew standing alongside. Cross barely recognizes his younger self, lean, intense, eyes that haven't yet learned to carry 60 years of accumulated weight. The text describes the modification, its tactical purpose, its psychological impact. It mentions Cross by name, along with the crew. At the bottom there's a note. The original device is preserved in the National Museum of the Pacific War in Tokyo. A replica is displayed at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia. William Jr. reads over his shoulder. "I never knew they put this here," he says, wonder in his voice. "You never told me there was a memorial plaque." "I didn't know either," Cross admits. "I haven't been back since '94. His son pulls out a camera, digital now, no film to ration, and takes a photograph of the plaque, then one of Cross standing beside it. "The grandkids are going to want to see this," William Jr. says. "Hell, I want to see this. All these years you told the story like it was just something that happened. I didn't realize other people thought it was important enough to put on a monument." Cross shrugs, uncomfortable with the attention. "It wasn't just me. It was the whole crew. And we got lucky. Right problem, right solution, right moment. Change any one of those and it wouldn't have mattered." "Dad," his son says gently, "you can be modest and still let history give you credit." They stand together in the warm Pacific breeze, looking out over the sea where the invasion fleet once gathered. After a long silence, Cross speaks. "You know what I think about most when I remember that time? It's not the horn, not the battles. It's the morning after the first night we used it, when the sun came up and we were still alive. Vasquez made coffee on a little camping stove. Worst coffee I've ever tasted, made from God knows what beans we'd scrounged. But we sat there on the hull, drinking it, watching the island wake up, and nobody said anything. We didn't need to. We'd made it through. That felt like everything." William Jr. listens, then asks the question he's been holding since they arrived. "Do you ever wish you'd done something different? Gone somewhere else? Been someone else? Avoided all of this?" Cross considers carefully. "No," he says finally. I wish the war had never happened. I wish Murphy and all the others were still alive, got to live their lives, marry their girlfriends, have kids and grandkids. I wish the world had found a way to solve its problems without sending millions of young men to kill each other on beaches and in jungles and cities. But given that it did happen, given that I was there, no, I don't wish I'd been somewhere else. He looks at the memorial, at the names stretching across the stone. Because if I hadn't been there, somebody else would have been in that tank. And maybe they wouldn't have thought of the horn. Maybe they wouldn't have made it through those nights. Maybe more names would be on this wall. I can't know. But I can live with what I did, with the choices I made. That's all any of us can do. They spend the afternoon touring other sites. The invasion beaches, now peaceful. The airfield, expanded and modernized, where B-29s once launched raids against Japan. The last command post, where the final Japanese defenders made their stand. At each place, Cross tells stories, not the sanitized versions from books, but the human details. The Marine who tripped over his own rifle and broke his nose. The tank that got stuck in a ditch and took 3 hours to extract. The day they found a cache of Japanese beer and had an impromptu party that got broken up by an annoyed captain. The small, absurd, utterly human moments that exist in the margins of grand historical narratives. By evening they return to their hotel, a modern building that overlooks the beach where Cross came ashore 6 decades earlier. In the room, Cross opens his bag and pulls out a worn leather journal. It's the notebook he's kept since 1944, now held together with rubber bands, pages yellowed and fragile. I want you to have this, he tells his son. William Jr. takes it carefully, reverently. Dad, are you sure? This is your whole war. Exactly. And I'm 83. I'm not going to live forever. When I'm gone, I want someone to have it. Someone who'll understand what it means. Maybe you. Maybe your kids someday. Just keep it safe. Keep the story alive. His son nods, unable to speak. That night, Cross dreams. Not the nightmares that plagued him for years after the war. Bodies in the sugarcane, tanks burning, the faces of the dead. Those have faded, worn smooth by time. Instead, he dreams of sitting on the hull of C-23, warm metal beneath him, the crew gathered around, talking and laughing about nothing in particular. The conversation has no words he can remember. But the feeling is clear. Safety, belonging, the simple comfort of being alive among friends. He wakes before dawn, feeling oddly peaceful. June 16, 2004. The commemoration ceremony is held at the Memorial Park. Perhaps 200 people attend. Veterans, families, local officials, school children from the island's international school. The crowd is small compared to the grand ceremonies of decades past. Each year, fewer veterans remain. Each year, the war recedes a little further into history. Cross sits in the front row, wearing a blazer decorated with his service ribbons. There aren't many. He was never one for medals. But the ones he has tell a story. Pacific Theater, Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa. The small, colorful rectangles of a life spent in extraordinary circumstances. A Marine colonel gives a speech about sacrifice and remembrance. A Japanese diplomat speaks about reconciliation and shared history. A local elder offers a blessing in Chamorro, the native language of the islands. Then Cross is called to the podium. He stands slowly, accepts help up the steps, positions himself behind the microphone. Looking out at the crowd, he sees faces of all ages. Veterans in their 80s, some in wheelchairs. Middle-aged children of veterans. Young people who weren't born until decades after the war ended. They're waiting to hear from a man who was there, who can connect them across the gulf of time to something that shaped the world they inherited. He thinks about what to say. All the speeches he's given over the years, all the classrooms where he taught, all the interviews and articles and ceremonies, what's left to add? What truth hasn't been spoken? Then he remembers the bell, the one given to him in Tokyo by the son of a Japanese soldier. He's brought it with him, carried it in his jacket pocket. He pulls it out, holds it up. This bell, he begins, his voice rough but steady, was given to me 10 years ago by a man whose father I never met. His father was a Japanese soldier who fought here, on this island, in June 1944. He survived the war and lived a long life. Before he died, he told his son about a night when he heard a strange sound, a sound that made him hesitate, made him think, made him choose to retreat instead of attack. He believed that sound saved his life. Cross rings the bell gently. The clear tone carries across the quiet crowd. I was part of the crew that made that sound. We mounted a foghorn on our tank because we were desperate, because men were dying every night, because we needed something, anything that might give us an edge. We didn't know if it would work. We just knew we had to try. He sets the bell on the podium. I've spent 60 years thinking about that night, about the choices we made, about the men who lived and the men who died. And I've come to understand something. War is a terrible crucible that reveals what humans are capable of, both the worst and the best. The worst is easy to see, the destruction, the cruelty, the waste. But the best is harder to recognize because it's quieter. It's the improvisation, the adaptability. The moments when people face impossible situations and somehow find a way through. He looks around the memorial park, at the names on the wall, at the sea beyond. That foghorn wasn't special because it was loud. It was special because it represented hope. Hope that we could think our way out of problems instead of just fighting through them. Hope that small innovations could save lives. Hope that even in the darkest moments, human ingenuity could find light. He pauses, gathering his thoughts. I'm told that horn is in a museum now, that school children see it and ask questions, that military officers study it as an example of battlefield adaptation. I'm grateful for that, but I hope they understand the full lesson. It's not about the machine. It's about the mindset, the willingness to look at what you have, even if it's just a salvaged foghorn and a desperate idea, and ask, how can this help? How can this save lives? How can this make tomorrow possible? He picks up the bell again, holds it in both hands. This bell was meant for prayer, a sound for peace. That soldier's son gave it to me as a reminder that sound can destroy or it can save. That fear can be a weapon or a warning. That even enemies can eventually become something else. He rings it once more. 60 years ago, I was a scared young lieutenant who didn't know if he'd see another sunrise. Today, I'm an old man who's seen 60 years of sunrises. More than I had any right to expect. Every one of those days is a gift from the men who didn't make it home, a gift from the choices we made in moments of crisis, a gift from the strange, improvised solutions that somehow worked when they shouldn't have. His voice cracks slightly. I can't speak for all veterans. I can only speak for myself. But if there's one thing I want people to understand, it's this. We didn't fight because we loved war. We fought because we wanted it to end. We wanted to go home. We wanted a world where foghorns guided ships through safe harbors, and bells rang in temples, and the loudest sounds were children playing. That's what we were trying to preserve. Not victory for its own sake, but the possibility of peace. He steps back from the microphone. The crowd sits in silence for a moment. Then applause begins. Soft at first, then building, sustained and sincere. Cross returns to his seat, exhausted but satisfied. He said what needed saying. The rest is up to history. After the ceremony, people approach him, veterans wanting to share their own stories, students asking for autographs, a film crew requesting an interview. Cross does his best, but he's tiring quickly. William Jr. runs interference, politely limiting the interactions, protecting his father's dwindling energy. One person waits patiently at the edge of the crowd, a woman in her 70s, Japanese, with a translator beside her. When the others have dispersed, she approaches. Mr. Cross, the translator says. This is Mrs. Tanaka. Her father was the curator who accepted your foghorn donation in 1945. She wanted to meet you. Cross bows slightly. Mrs. Tanaka bows in return, then speaks in Japanese. The translator continues. She says her father spoke of you often. He said you were a man who understood that artifacts have souls. That history is carried not just in objects but in the stories we tell about them. He made her promise to continue his work at the museum. She has been the chief curator for 20 years. Cross feels something tighten in his chest. Your father was a good man. He treated that horn with respect. He understood what it meant. More Japanese, more translation. She says the museum is planning a new permanent exhibit on innovation and adaptation in warfare. The foghorn will be the centerpiece. They want to include oral histories, interactive displays, perhaps a replica that visitors can hear. She asks if you would be willing to record an interview for the exhibit. Cross glances at his son, who nods encouragingly. Yes, Cross says. I'd be honored. Mrs. Tanaka smiles, pulls out a small wrapped package. Inside is a book, newly published in English, titled Sounds of War, Acoustic Innovation in the Pacific Theater. The cover shows a black and white photograph of a Sherman tank. She says this is a gift. The author interviewed her extensively about the foghorn. There is a whole chapter about your crew. She thought you might like to read how history has remembered you. Cross takes the book, holds it carefully. Thank you, he says, voice thick. Please tell her thank you. That evening, back in the hotel room, Cross opens the book. The chapter about the foghorn is titled The Sound That Changed Nights. It's 30 pages of meticulously researched text, drawing on documents Cross provided decades ago, interviews with veterans, Japanese military records, and analysis from military historians. Reading it is surreal. The author describes tactical details Cross barely remembers, quotes from after-action reports he didn't know existed, analyzes the psychological impact with academic precision. There are footnotes, citations, photographs he's never seen before, Japanese documents captured after the war, referencing enemy audio-psychological devices, and recommending countermeasures. But what strikes Cross most is a section near the end, where the author interviews men who served in other units, who heard about the foghorn secondhand, who tried their own variations. A tank commander on Okinawa who mounted sirens salvaged from a fire truck. A rifle company that used megaphones to broadcast fake radio chatter, convincing a Japanese unit they were surrounded. An artillery crew that recorded the sound of tanks and played it through loudspeakers to mask their actual positions. All of them citing C-23's foghorn as inspiration. All of them improvising, adapting, surviving. Cross realizes the story he thought was small, just one tank, one crew, one strange idea, had rippled outward farther than he ever knew. That men he never met had lived because someone heard about a foghorn and thought, maybe I can try something like that. He closes the book, sets it on the nightstand, stares at the ceiling. William Jr., reading in the other bed, glances over. You okay, Dad? Yeah, Cross says quietly. Just processing. I spent 60 years thinking about what we did. I never spent much time thinking about what it led to. Legacy, his son says simply. Maybe. Or maybe just proof that good ideas are contagious. That innovation spreads. That when people share what works, everyone benefits. He's quiet for a moment, then adds, I wish the others could see this. Holloway, Vasquez, Webb, Chen. They deserve to know the story didn't end with us. They know, William Jr. says. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere they know. Their actions mattered. That's legacy too. Cross thinks of the letters he received over the years. Of Vasquez's daughter saying her father kept everyone. Of Webb's words, you saved lives. That matters. Of Holloway's quiet observation about making things work when they shouldn't. They knew. In their own ways, they knew. The next morning, Cross and his son take one final walk along the beach. It's early, the sun just rising, the sand cool beneath their feet. Crabs scuttle sideways into the surf. Seabirds wheel overhead, calling to each other in simple, timeless language. They walk in silence for a long time. Finally, Cross stops, looks out at the horizon where the invasion fleet once gathered. You know what I remember most clearly, he says. The morning after the war ended, I was still in Japan, on occupation duty. I woke up and realized, really realized, that nobody was going to try to kill me that day, or the next day, or the day after that. That I could make plans beyond tomorrow. That felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. He watches the waves roll in. We take it for granted now. Peace, safety. The assumption that we'll wake up tomorrow and go about our lives. But it's not guaranteed. It's built, maintained, fought for when necessary. And sometimes, it's preserved by strange, improvised solutions that nobody planned for. William Jr. puts a hand on his father's shoulder. You did your part, Dad. More than your part. You can rest now. Cross nods slowly. Yeah, I think I can. They turn and walk back toward the hotel, leaving footprints in the wet sand that the tide will erase before noon. June 17, 2004. The flight back to the mainland is long. Cross sleeps through most of it, waking occasionally to look out the window at the vast Pacific stretching below. The same ocean he crossed as a young man, full of fear and determination, heading toward battles he couldn't imagine. Now he's crossing it again, heading home, carrying memories that have become part of history. In Seattle, William Jr. drives him to the house. a small, comfortable place Cross has lived in since Helen died. There are photographs on the walls, family pictures, vacation snapshots, a few from the war. The foghorn isn't prominently displayed. It never was. Just one photo among many. A piece of a larger life. Over the following weeks, Cross settles back into routine. He tends his garden, reads, watches the news, attends his grandson's baseball games. The rhythms of ordinary life, precious and mundane. But something has shifted. The trip to Saipan, the ceremony, the book, Mrs. Tanaka's promise of a new exhibit. All of it has stirred something he thought had settled long ago. Not regret. Not even nostalgia exactly. More like completion. The sense that a circle has closed. One afternoon he receives a phone call. It's from the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. They're planning a special exhibit on improvisation and innovation in combat, and they'd like to feature the foghorn story prominently. Would Cross be willing to donate some of his personal papers? The notebook, perhaps, letters, photographs. Cross considers. That notebook has been with him for 60 years. It's private, personal, full of raw thoughts and emotions he never intended to share. But it's also a record, a primary source. Evidence of how history actually unfolded, not how it was remembered or sanitized later. Yes, he tells the curator, but on one condition. What's that, sir? Make copies. Keep the originals in climate-controlled storage, but make copies that researchers can access. I don't want this locked away. I want people to read it, study it, learn from it. That's the whole point. Absolutely, sir. We'll treat it with the utmost care. Cross ships the notebook, along with letters, photographs, and a typed copy of his 1974 article with handwritten annotations he's added over the years. It feels like giving away a piece of his soul, but it also feels right. Summer 2004 becomes fall. Fall becomes winter. Cross celebrates Christmas with his family, his son, his grandchildren, the expanding circle of people who carry his genes and his stories into the future. On New Year's Eve, as midnight approaches, Cross stands on his back porch, looking up at the stars. He thinks about time. About how 60 years can feel like both an eternity and an instant. About how the young man who climbed into a tank in 1943 would barely recognize the old man he's become. But in some essential way, he's still that lieutenant, still making decisions in the dark, still hoping the improvised solution will work, still trusting the people around him to do their part. The clock strikes midnight. Fireworks bloom across the city sky, bursts of color and sound, celebratory rather than destructive. Cross smiles. He thinks of the horn, of how sound can be so many things. Warning, weapon, celebration, prayer. He thinks of the bell in his pocket, the one he carries always now. He pulls it out, rings it once into the night. The tone is clear and pure, a single note rising into the darkness and fading slowly, gently, into silence. March 2006. William Cross passes away quietly in his sleep, 2 months shy of his 85th birthday. The obituary in the Seattle Times is respectful but brief. William J. Cross, 84, Marine Corps veteran and retired teacher, survived by his son William Jr., daughter Anne, 4 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Memorial service to be held. It doesn't mention the foghorn. There's no room in a few column inches for strange wartime innovations. But at the memorial service, William Jr. tells the story. He stands before a room full of family, friends, former students, and speaks about a father who rarely talked about his own accomplishments, but who changed history in small, essential ways. He shows the photograph from Saipan, reads excerpts from the notebook, describes the trip they took together in 2004, the monuments and memories, the Japanese woman whose father was saved by a moment of hesitation. My father taught me, William Jr. says, voice steady, that heroism isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just being willing to try something nobody's tried before, to look at what you have and ask, how can this help? He did that in war. He did that in peace. He did that every day of his life. He holds up the bell, the one Cross carried for his last 2 years. This was his. He asked me to keep it, to ring it sometimes and remember that sound can be many things. Weapon, warning, celebration, prayer. It depends on how we choose to use it. He rings the bell once. The clear tone fills the room, hangs in the air, fades slowly into silence. In the weeks that follow, as William Jr. sorts through his father's belongings, he finds one last surprise. It's a sealed envelope addressed to him with instructions written on the front. To be opened after I'm gone. Inside is a letter, handwritten in Cross's increasingly shaky script. Dear Bill, If you're reading this, I'm gone. Strange to write that, knowing I won't be around to see you read it. But there are some things I want to say while I still have the chance. The foghorn story, the one everyone asks about, is true. Every word. But it's also incomplete. It's not about a machine or a tactic. It's about people choosing to trust each other in the dark. Holloway trusted me to make the right call. Vasquez trusted his equipment. Webb trusted his aim. Chen trusted the rhythm we'd built over months of fighting. I trusted all of them. That's the real lesson. Not innovation for its own sake, but innovation built on trust. On the willingness to try something untested because the people around you believe in the attempt. I've spent 60 years thinking about that night on Saipan. About the choices we made. About the men who lived and died. And I've realized, we were all just doing our best with what we had. That's all anyone can do. Do your best. Trust the people who trust you. Try things that might not work because sometimes they do. You've been a good son, Bill. Better than I deserved. You listened to my stories even when they got repetitive. You took me back to Saipan when I needed to see it one more time. You're keeping the memory alive. The bell is yours now. Pass it down. Let it remind our family that sound can be many things. That we choose every day, whether to make sounds of war or sounds of peace. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of our family. I'm grateful for every sunrise I got that I didn't earn. Live well. Love well. Listen to the sounds around you and choose carefully which ones to make. Dad. William Jr. reads the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Then he carefully folds it, places it back in the envelope, and tucks it into the notebook his father gave him. The one that now sits in a climate-controlled archive at Quantico, available to researchers, telling its story to anyone who cares to listen. The new exhibit opens at the Marine Corps Museum. Innovation Under Fire, Improvisation in Combat, features artifacts from conflicts spanning a century. Among them, in a place of honor, is a replica foghorn mounted on a section of Sherman hull, surrounded by photographs, documents, and Cross's notebook displayed in a sealed case. There's an audio component. Visitors can press a button and hear what the horn actually sounded like, a recording made from the original horn in Tokyo, digitally preserved and played through speakers. The sound fills the gallery. Deep, resonant, primal. Children jump, adults startle. Everyone understands in that moment how it must have felt to hear that sound in the darkness, unexpected and overwhelming. A video screen shows interviews, Cross speaking in 1994, then again in 2004. Other veterans sharing their own stories of improvisation, historians providing context. The exhibit is popular, it tours to other military museums, articles are written, a documentary filmmaker expresses interest. The foghorn, once a strange curiosity bolted to a single tank, becomes an example studied at military academies. A case study in adaptive thinking. A reminder that wars are won not just by superior equipment, but by superior application of whatever equipment exists. William Jr., now in his 60s, receives an invitation. The Japanese government is hosting a reconciliation ceremony on Saipan, marking the 71st anniversary of the battle. They'd like him to attend as his father's representative. To speak. To help close wounds that have taken 70 years to heal. He goes. Standing where his father stood, looking out at the same sea, William Jr. tells the story once more. But he adds something new. My father spent the last decade of his life thinking about sound. About how the same physics that can destroy can also preserve. About how volume and frequency matter less than intention. He received a bell from a Japanese veteran's son. A sound for peace? He carried it until the day he died. William Jr. pulls out the bell. Tarnished now, but still functional. I'm going to leave this here. Not as a memorial to my father, though he'd be honored. But as a reminder that we can choose what sounds we make. That every generation decides whether to echo the past or compose something new. He rings the bell one final time, then places it on the memorial wall, in a small alcove between the names. The bell sits there still. Sometimes the wind rings it softly. Sometimes visitors ring it deliberately, reading the small plaque that explains its significance. The sound carries across the island, clear and pure, a single note of memory and hope. 81 years after the battle. A high school history class from California visits Saipan on an educational trip. They tour the beaches, the monuments, the museum. Most of them are bored, teenagers scrolling on phones, more interested in the hotel pool than historical sites. But one girl, 16 years old, named Sarah, stops at the foghorn exhibit. She reads the plaques, studies the photographs, presses the button to hear the sound. The horn's roar fills the small museum space. She jumps, then smiles. Her teacher approaches. "Interesting, isn't it?" "It's so simple," Sarah says. "Just a horn. But they used it like a weapon. Or not a weapon exactly. Like a tool. To change how the enemy thought." "That's exactly right." Sarah takes out her phone. Not to scroll social media, but to photograph the exhibit. "I'm going to write my history paper on this," she says. "About how innovation doesn't always mean inventing something new. Sometimes it means using old things in new ways." The teacher nods. "I think Lieutenant Cross would appreciate that." That evening, Sarah sits in the hotel typing on her laptop. She writes about the foghorn, about the crew of C-23, about the ripple effects of one desperate idea. She quotes from Cross's notebook, now fully digitized and available online. She analyzes the tactical implications and the psychological impact, but she also writes about legacy, about how a sound made 81 years ago still echoes, about how innovation, documented and shared, becomes part of the collective knowledge that future generations build upon. She doesn't know it, but her paper will win a state competition. Will be published in a student history journal. Will be read by a young Marine officer who'll remember it years later when faced with her own impossible situation. The ripples spread, always spreading. Today, somewhere in the world, a researcher opens Cross's notebook in a digital archive. Somewhere, a veteran tells a grandchild about the strange things people did to survive. Somewhere, a tank crew improvises a solution to a problem their manual doesn't cover. Somewhere, a teacher uses the foghorn as an example. This is how adaptation works. This is how ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances change the world in small, essential ways. The original horn sits in Tokyo, behind climate-controlled glass, surrounded by context and memory. The replica tours museums, letting new generations hear what 1944 sounded like. The bell rings on Saipan when the wind blows right, a sound for peace on an island that knows the cost of war. And the story continues. Not because it's particularly dramatic. Men have done braver things, more spectacular things, more important things in wars throughout history. But because it's human. Because it shows what happens when people refuse to accept the impossible. When they look at what they have, even if it's just a salvaged foghorn and a desperate idea, and ask, how can this help? Because it reminds us that history is made not just by generals and politicians, but by sergeants and lieutenants and ordinary people who improvise, adapt, overcome. Because it proves that small innovations, shared and documented, ripple forward through time, informing and inspiring long after the innovators are gone. William Cross would have been uncomfortable with that kind of attention. He spent his life insisting he was just doing his job, just trying to survive, just making the best decisions he could with the information he had. But that's the point. We're all just doing our jobs, just trying to survive, just making the best decisions we can. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those decisions echo forward. They become lessons. They become case studies. They become stories told at memorials and written in papers and preserved in museums. They become the sound that breaks the darkness. Not once, but over and over, every time someone hears the story and thinks, maybe I can try something like that. Maybe there's a way through I haven't seen yet. Maybe the impossible is just the untried. That's the legacy of C-23's foghorn. Not the machine itself, though it survives. Not the tactical innovation, though it's studied. But the idea, simple, powerful, enduring, that we are not helpless in the dark. That we can make our own light. That we can choose what sounds we send into the night. And that sometimes those sounds change everything. This story exists now because people like William Cross chose to document what they lived, because they wrote it down, photographed it, preserved it, shared it, because they understood that their small moments were part of something larger. Your attention, your listening, honors that choice. Wherever you are in the world, in cities those men never saw, in countries that didn't exist when they were young, in a future they could barely imagine, you've spent this hour with them. You've heard their story. You've learned what they learned. That humanity persists even in war. That innovation comes from desperation and trust. That sound can be many things depending on how we choose to use it. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something important, share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because these stories matter. Because the men and women who lived them matter. Because their lessons, their courage, their improvised brilliance deserve to echo forward. They went into the dark so we wouldn't have to. The least we can do is remember them well.